I know that another call is coming today. I don't know when and I don't know why, but it will. They have been the only constant in the chaotic maelstrom of decision and consequence that has been the last few weeks of my life. Oddly reassuring knowing I can look forward to them, yet completely powerless to know exactly when they will occur, or more importantly, what I should do about them. Any doubt is gone. I have seen too many things to believe it is just some trick or coincidence. I don't want to believe, but I have to now. I know I have a responsibility to do something, I just don't know what that is most of the time. I am tired and overwhelmed, but someone has to do something, and that someone is me. I was chosen to know what will happen and given the burden of stopping it, or just bearing witness. I suppose I understand how ignorance can be bliss now. Sorry, I should elaborate and tell you what has been happening to me these last few weeks. I know it might sound crazy, but bear with me. The first call was 2 weeks ago. I was just getting off work and had to take care of something that was equal parts annoying and expensive. I needed to pick up a new phone since I managed to completely break my old Galaxy by dropping it the day before. The screen shattered, of course, but worse, some damage to the internal components completely broke it, and it would not boot up or do anything other than display a blank screen. As I was about to head out to purchase my new device, the seemingly dead phone sprang to life and started ringing. Not with my own ringtone, but a strange chime I had not heard before, and was not sure if it was even in the list of pre-programmed ringtones. I was confused how it could still ring, but was momentarily relieved, since I figured it might still work after all. I could not really afford anything better at the moment anyway, so if I could, I would save the expense. Putting aside the decision to keep my shattered phone a while longer or not, I answered the call. I was surprised and disturbed when before I could even say hello, and panic-stricken voice cut me off. "Help! Oh God, please help, someone stabbed him. They stabbed Michael, please send help." It sounded like someone was trying to call the emergency line, and somehow it got sent to my broken phone. I was confused, and I tried to explain to the distraught person on the phone that I was not emergency services. "I am sorry, I know it sounds like a real emergency there, but you need to dial 911 and get help. I don't know who this is and I can't track the location. This is a personal cell phone, not 911. Before I could try and explain more, I was cut off. "What do you mean? I did call 911, I need help. Someone stole our car and stabbed my boyfriend Michael. We need help now. Get a real dispatcher or something, please. He is losing so much blood. We need help now. We are near the park on Tor..." "What was it?" She paused, likely confirming the address. "We are on 4th Ave and Beckett Street, I think. Please send help." I did not know what I could do. I had tried to suggest they call 911, but they sounded sure that they had. I did not know how to tell the panicked woman that I couldn't help. I finally decided on a plan and told her, "All right, ma'am, try and stay calm. I will try and call emergency services myself and send them there. Please try and call 911 again over there and see if it routes you correctly so someone can help. What can I tell them your name is?" There was a pause and the voice on the other line spoke again. "It's Kendra. Static interrupted her response, and after a moment the line went dead. I tried to call 911, but after that call my dead phone had died once again, and it was unable to make even an emergency call. I hoped that whoever that Kendra woman was got hold of emergency services. I had no idea how I had gotten the call, but either way they really needed help, and I sure was not an EMT. I thought they likely got through since I did not get another call, but the more I thought about it, the more concerned and responsible I felt. I considered the location she gave. I knew that park. It was not too far from where I was, so I figured I would go and check and make sure that they got through to 911 and someone was there on scene to help. I drove out to the park and found the corner of the park by 4th and Beckett. Not many people were around since it was fairly late in the evening. Certainly no signs of a stabbing or carjacking on this street corner. Since no one was around, I started thinking that maybe I had been the victim of a prank and that no one was here. It might have just been some elaborate crank call, meant to rile people up about emergencies for some kind of sick entertainment. I felt upset by being fooled, but also relieved that no one was really in trouble, and I decided to head home. The Verizon store was closed by that point, so I would have to try again tomorrow. I stuffed the Verizon coupon I had saved, and hoped would help discount a new phone for me back into my pocket. Having scribbled the address that Kendra had given me on the back of the paper, I started to feel silly for having gone out there. The next evening after work I was planning to go buy the overpriced replacement for my phone again. As I got into my car to leave, I fumbled in my pocket for the coupon I had received and had written the address from the prank call the day before on. It was not there. My heart sank. It was a coupon for $100 off on a new Galaxy phone. which, considering how much they cost, was not a huge percentage, and I would have to finance it anyway. Still, $100 was $100. I still had a while before the store closed, so I decided to check back by the park. I thought maybe I may have dropped it there when I had gotten out to look for the so-called crime scene. It was a stupid idea. I knew that. I figured that unless someone was going to buy a phone, they might not have picked it up, and it could still be there. I drove back to where I had been the previous night. There were more people around this time. A few joggers, some bike riders, and people walking the trail. I parked and got out of my car and started looking near where I had been standing the night before. The whole idea was stupid, but if it could save me a bit of money, I would go for it. As expected, after fumbling around for a few minutes, I could not find the paper anywhere, and I started walking back to my car. I saw a young couple walking hand in hand back to the parking lot as well. They had arrived back at their car, and the gentleman opened the door for his lady. I thought the gesture was very sweet, which made the next few moments even more horrifying. As he closed the door and started to the driver's side, a figure dressed in all black jumped out of the nearby bushes and shouted at the man. I couldn't make out the words from where I was, but he was holding something, and when the gentleman reached into his pocket, the figure in black lunged forward and attacked. He seemed to stab the gentleman several times, and I heard a scream from the woman who had just emerged from their car. She was still screaming and rushed towards the fallen man, and I thought I heard her shout, "Michael, no." I stood there frozen, unable to act. I knew I should help, but I was paralyzed by the sudden brutality and horror of the situation. Before I could move, the man in black peeled out of the parking lot in the couple's car. They remained where they were. Her screaming continued, and she held on to him. The sound had finally snapped me out of my confused and terrified daze, and I raced over to try and help. As soon as I approached, the woman looked up at me. Her hands were covered in the man's blood, and she begged for help. "Help, call 911, he's been stabbed, my Michael, he's been stabbed." I fell back in confused shock. The voice was familiar, the name was too. That was the woman from the phone call yesterday. It sounded exactly like her. There was no mistaking it. I couldn't understand how it was all happening in that moment. My confused reverie was interrupted by the woman shouting me back to my senses. "Don't just stand there, please, we need help." I did not know how to respond, but I managed to stutter out a meek, My phone's broken, I'm so sorry, maybe I can find help." As I backed away, trying to figure out what to do, a jogger had happened by and raced over to help. She sat down with them and was assisting in stabilizing Michael. She had given her cell phone to the woman who seemed to be calling 911. As she finished dialing the number, I felt an odd tingling in the air, and suddenly my broken phone vibrated and a notification bell chimed. I sat there dumbly watching everything unfold in disbelief. After a brief delay, I heard her speak, and I was not prepared, though perhaps I should have been, for what happened next. "Help! Oh God, please help, someone stabbed him. They stabbed Michael, please send help." I felt an odd thrumming of electrical energy from the phone as she spoke, and I knew what she was going to say next. "What do you mean? I did call 911, I need help. Someone stole our car and stabbed my boyfriend Michael. We need help now. Get a real dispatcher or something, please. He is losing so much blood. We need help now. We are near the park on, what was it?" I unconsciously mouthed the words that followed, since I had heard them less than 24 hours before. "We are on 4th Ave and Beckett Street, I think, please send help." Another brief pause, and then she would say her name. The buzzing and thrumming from the phone stopped moments after she said her name. "It's Kendra Wallace. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? Please send someone. He's going to bleed to death, please." She continued screaming into the phone, and then went back to Michael prone form while the jogger who had come to help attempted to call emergency services again. It sounded like she had gotten through, as was giving the location to someone on the phone. When an ambulance arrived, I left the scene. I couldn't handle the insanity of what I had just experienced. How in the hell did I get a phone call about all of the things that had happened that night the day before? I fell into my car and gripped the wheel and tried to process the insanity of what had just happened. I had no idea how any of this was possible. As I tried to keep from hyperventilating, I heard another notification on my phone. I had received a text message somehow. Despite the messenger app not functioning, it had a message screen displayed with one unread message. I tried to see if any other apps or anything would work, and it would not navigate to anything else. The only thing I could do was to open the thread. It left me even more confused than I had been before the message just read. "Come on, were you even trying? Better luck next time. See you around, M." I had so many questions. Chief among them was, who the hell was M? And how did they know about what had happened? Before I had time to consider the madness of the situation, my phone started to ring again in the same weird chime from yesterday. I had a feeling I knew what would happen if I picked up. Holding my breath and steeling myself, I answered the call. Placing the phone to my ear and not knowing for certain what to expect, I managed a meek, "Hello?" A voice on the other end responded. They sounded very young, likely a child. "Hello, is this 911? We need help. We got in a big car accident and Mommy and Daddy are not moving. I think they are really hurt. Please help." My heart sank. I started to panic. I did not know if this was really happening or was going to happen like the other call. Whatever the case, this kid's parents were seriously injured or worse. I couldn't exactly call 911 myself and tell them that something bad somewhere was going to happen. I resolved to get as much information from the terrified child on the phone as possible. Maybe then I could do something about it, whatever that might be. I heard crying on the line, and I spoke slowly and clearly to try and reassure the poor thing that help would arrive, just not in the way she likely expected. "I know this is scary, but I promise I'm going to try and help. What is your name and your parents' names?" The crying abated slightly, and the trembling reply was, "Chloe, my name is Chloe. My parents are Richard and Abigail." "That is great, Chloe. Thank you. And what is your last name?" "It's Keller." I was grateful she was old enough to know their family surname. "Thank you, Chloe. Can you tell me what happened? How did your mummy and daddy get hurt? What happened with the car accident? Did your car hit something, or did someone hit your family's car?" "We were just driving down the road and we were waiting at a red light, and as soon as it turned green and we started going again, a silver car hit us on the side and knocked our car over, and it sped off." I heard more crying, and I tried to speed up the questioning without pressuring her. I didn't know how long I had. "Do you know what type of car your family has? What color of car is it, and what is the brand name on the back?" There was brief hesitation, and then she spoke again. "It is a red car. I think the label says it is a toy something, Toyota. I don't know anything else. That is just what the label says. Red Toyota was something to go on at least, though I had wished I had the model as well. I did not bother asking for the plate number. I doubted she would know or be able to check that." "Thank you, Chloe. You are being so brave. Now can you see where you are? Are you able to see any road signs to help find where you and your family are?" I hoped she was able to see something to help find them. I had a terrible feeling that if this was somewhere rural, I might not be able to find wherever it was happening. "I think I see a sign. I can't get out of the car. I am stuck. It is getting hard to see. There is smoke everywhere. I think I can see a sign by the light we were passing. It says Bishop or Bishop or something. I can't tell from here. Please, it is getting hard to breathe in here." I was dreading the implication of what she said last. If there was a fire and she was stuck in that vehicle and no one was around to help, she would not have much time. "Okay, that is great. Can you see another sign or anything else that can help locate you and your mummy and daddy?" She started to speak again, but went into a coughing fit that lasted for several seconds. She managed to start again. "I don't see another street sign, but there is a bus stop or something near the road. I think I see a number 18 on it. I think... Oh no, help. The car is on fire now. Help. Please. Help." Static assaulted my eardrums as I lowered the phone in an anxiety-fueled stupor. The phone was dead again, of course. No indication it had just answered a call from a terrified little girl in the future. I had to do something. I had no idea if it was really going to happen twice. I would not take any chances, though. I hoped that the call came from within the city limits, otherwise it could be anywhere, and the chance of finding the right street and getting there on time tomorrow was near impossible. I looked up the municipal bus routes and tried to find a bus stop or route marked 18. With a little map work, I was able to locate it, and sure enough, it was right near the streetlight and intersection of Bishop Street and Mullen Ave. I had my location, or so I thought. Now I just needed to know when it was going to happen. I realized I forgot to ask what time it was when I was asking for details. I checked the phone just in case it had a timestamp from the call, but it would not display anything. My hunch was that since the call yesterday came later in the evening and the actual event occurred at a similar time of night, that the emergencies that correspond to the calls occurred at the same time, just on the subsequent day. I did not want to risk it in case I was wrong, so I resolved to take the next day off of work and get to that intersection and go on a stakeout and wait. I got there at around 6 in the morning and parked on the curb, near the bus stop, but not blocking it. It was going to be a long day, but I tried to remain alert and vigilant. As I had expected, nothing happened in the morning or afternoon. I was about to conclude my theory as correct and expect the accident to occur near 10 o'clock in the evening, based on the time of the previous call. It was 4:42 in the afternoon, and I was about to step out of the car to find a nearby public restroom. since I had been sitting there for so long. Suddenly the phone sprang to life with that eerie chime. I looked at the road frantically for a red Toyota. The phone kept ringing, and I realized it might not be related to this instance. It might be a different emergency call. I answered, and I heard a new, desperate voice begging for help. "Hello, 911, my name is Stacey Thomas. I am at the rest stop on exit 112, and we need ambulance and police here right now. A woman has been assaulted, and she is in bad shape. I think she is still alive, but I don't know. Please send someone." It was another one. I had to get more information. "All right, Miss Thomas. Did you see anything happen, or did you just find this woman?" I was driving on the interstate and stopped to use the restroom. When I got to the woman's room, there was an out-of-order sign in front, but I heard a cry for help and found a woman who was battered and barely conscious inside. "I don't know what happened, but we need help here now." I considered how I could ask for more details without sounding strange and upsetting the woman on the phone. "All right, I promise help will arrive. Would you please tell me if the woman has an ID on her to identify? Also, if she has any keys on her, would you be able to tell what car she has parked there, if it is still there?" There was an audible hesitation, and I figured she was considering the odd question. "Isn't that something the police can do when they get here? We need help now," she is, barely holding on. "This is a medical emergency as well. Can't the police investigate?" It was a fair question, and I could tell she was getting impatient, so I was considering how to rephrase it to emphasize the importance of the detail when, to my shock and horror, I heard the audible static that signaled the end of the divining phone call. "Hello, still there." 5 more seconds of loud static, and the phone was dead. I wrote down all of the details I had for that call. They would have to do. I figured at least I had a location and a general time, though the call was after it happened, so I would have to get there early enough to try and stop it. I wrote down my game plan for tomorrow in my notebook. After my deliberation, I noticed it was starting to get dark outside, and I had to focus on the accident that was going to happen that day. One emergency at a time, I figured. It was getting closer to 10, and I was on high alert. I still did not know what I was going to do to stop the accident. When it was just a few minutes before 10, I got out of my car and walked up to the light. I was just going to have to get their attention when I saw them, and hopefully stop them from crossing at the fateful moment. Sure enough, just a few minutes after 10, a red Toyota Corolla was heading towards the light and came to a stop. I looked in and saw a man driving the car with a woman in the passenger seat and a child in the back seat. I tried to flag them down, but they may have thought I was a panhandler, and the father ignored my attempts at getting their attention. My heart was racing. The light was about to change to green, and I knew in my gut it was going to happen. I decided to do something crazy, and I leaped into the road, directly blocking the car from going any further. The father scowled and started honking the horn at me, and the mother had a concerned, almost pitying look on her face. I realized I probably looked crazy to them, but I had to try and stop them from going at just that moment. I looked behind me, and the light turned green. Nothing happened, and when I did not see a speeding car immediately, I started to doubt myself. The father looked angry now and was unbuckling his seatbelt, probably to get out and throw me off of the road. He never got the chance. I felt the air pressure and wind blast from a speeding car behind me, and a load crash and strangled scream rang out. I looked behind, and a silver sedan was speeding away from the intersection, trailing blood in its wake. I did not know what it was, but something seemed familiar about that car. I realized in sudden horror that I had seen it before. It was the young couple's car from the night before. It had been stolen, and the carjacker was still in possession of it. Before I could make sense of the horrible connection, I realized that despite saving the family in the car, someone else had not been so lucky. A cyclist had been crossing the road at the same time and was apparently struck by the speeding car instead of the family. I was stunned by the damage that had been done. The man on the bike was torn up and was very likely dead already. I could not process what I was seeing, but I heard a voice shouting in the dim periphery of my senses. "Richard, call 911, we need help. Someone hit that man." Chloe's parents stepped out of the car and told her to stay inside. She regarded me as I back away, and I saw the couple near the body of the biker calling the real emergency services. I backed up with a confused mix of emotions. I had saved the young family, but it had led to that cyclist being stuck instead. As I stood there in a daze, my phone vibrated, and I noticed I had another message. I steadied my trembling hands and read it. "Very utilitarian of you. You saved 3 by sacrificing 1. You are doing better, but not quite there. Keep it up, and don't disappoint me. M." I had no idea how to feel. I thought I could save them, and I did, but at the cost of someone else. I could not figure out why this was happening to me. Why was I chosen? I felt confused and numb, but I had to put those feelings aside. Another crisis had to be resolved, as I had to prepare to handle the other call from tomorrow, today. All I knew about the next emergency was it was called in after the fact, and it was some sort of assault that left a woman almost dead in a bathroom at the rest stop near exit 112 near the interstate. The call ended earlier than usual, and I hoped this was not going to be a recurring thing. I barely had time to get that information. I was going to have to stop some sort of attack around the woman's restroom, waiting however long it takes for the would-be attacker and victim to show. Easy, right? With more time to prepare for this one, I knew I would need to get some supplies. I went to a nearby Walmart and picked up some stakeout equipment. I bought some binoculars and some rope and zip ties in case I could catch the attacker and restrain him. I wanted to try and get a shotgun or something, but carrying that around near a public rest stop would draw too much attention, so I settled for a short-range taser and a hammer for a backup weapon. I had no expectation of what would happen, but if this person was violent as the call implied, I would need to be prepared for a confrontation. With my supplies in hand, I reviewed my plan. I had received the call around 4 in the afternoon, so I knew I had to get there well before then. As for what to do when I got there, I did not know. Too few details on what happened specifically. I would have to get there early and wing it and hopefully save that woman. Perhaps just being there might act as a deterrent. I spent the rest of the night trying to research the victims and see if there was any connection between them. I had no idea if there was, but something about those odd texts from M made me think they might be less random than I first thought. I created a makeshift conspiracy board, complete with different colored threads to link people and things together. Despite how crazy I felt when looking at the web of random people and events, I shrugged and set about the task of making sense of as much as I could while I had time. I looked up any news from the car accident today. I checked the closest hospital and found out that a cyclist was brought in from a reported hit and run by the name of Calvin Thomas. He had arrived by ambulance, but he did not survive. I felt the weight of guilt again. I know I was not at fault, but I had known it would happen, and my efforts to stop anyone from getting hurt had failed. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling of despair and focus on my research. I considered the name, fairly common last name, though with my mind searching for connections, I thought that maybe he might be related to the woman who called about tomorrow's accident. She said her name was Stacy Thomas. It could be true, but I was not sure. I might be making connections where there are none to try and make sense of it all. I could not find out much about Kendra Wallace from the first call. The news had covered the violent stabbing and carjacking of her boyfriend, one Mr. Michael Duncan. The only thing I found about him besides the news of the crime itself was a staff public disclosure request for an odd research firm known as Hope for the Future. His name showed up as an employee of the firm, but I was not able to glean many details about what sort of work they did or anything else. Whoever this M was, he clearly had some kind of control over how and when these things happened. Otherwise, how would he know about them as soon as they occurred? How the hell he could send me those text messages right after they happened, on this time-manipulating phone? Maybe he knew about them because he was the one causing them in the first place. I never got to see the man in black who carjacked that couple and stabbed the man from the first call. He could still be driving the car he stole, the same car he was driving when he killed that cyclist in place of the family. I considered he may even be parked at the rest stop tomorrow somewhere, waiting for another victim to come by. Based on the taunting messages, he would also be waiting for me and whatever it was he expected me to do. It seemed like it was some sick game, and he was using some impossible manipulation skill to predict the future as a means of messing with or testing people. Those messages he sends, they all read like this is some sort of test that he is giving me, and that I have to meet some expected outcome that only he knows about. I felt like I was walking into a trap or some unwinnable situation, yet I knew if I did nothing then the tragedies would really happen. I slept poorly that night, and had dreams of failing to rescue the people who had called for help. I saw the faces of the people I had already failed, the men who died already because I couldn't find a way to save them. I ended up oversleeping, and it was nearly 10 in the morning. I had to get going. I had no idea how long the woman was stuck in there before she was discovered. I grabbed my bag of supplies and started on my way to the highway, and then to the rest stop by exit 112. I arrived early in the morning and parked near the men's restroom. I was close enough to the woman's to scout any movement in or out of it with my binoculars. Despite my good intentions, I knew how it might look. So I also picked up a newspaper as well, not to read it, but more as a cover in case someone looked too closely and saw me sitting in a car with binoculars trained on the woman's restroom. I did not want to attract notice and throw the whole plan off. I had no idea what might happen if I scared the attacker away by some incidental force. Maybe he would attack someone else. Maybe it would be even worse than just one person. I didn't know, but I would not risk it. A few hours passed, and it was noon already. The rest stop was not very busy, and few cars actually stopped in the hours I had been waiting. I figured that was a good thing, since it would be easier to notice anything amiss. I kept my broken phone close at hand in case I received another emergency call while waiting like before. At around 3 o'clock, I saw a white sedan drive up and park. A well-dressed and fairly attractive woman got out and went in by herself. I was on high alert as I knew it was within an hour of the call's time. My paranoia was vindicated when a moment later I looked and saw a tall figure dressed in dark clothes sneaking quickly to the entrance. He put down a sign that said, "Out of order," and appeared to enter the restroom. I nearly tripped over my own feet scrambling to get out of the car and gather up my gear. I had the taser in hand and the hammer in my pocket. I rushed to the restroom and did not hear anything inside yet. I knew I did not have time to think it over, and I rushed headlong through the door. I looked left and right, and did not see the figure in black anywhere. As I stood there in confusion, I saw a stall door open, and the woman step out, leaving her stall and seeing me standing there holding a taser looking all around the woman's restroom. She very quickly loosed an understandable scream. I realized immediately how it looked, and I held up my hands and offered a prompt. Sorry, I am so sorry. I thought someone came in here and I was trying to stop them myself. I promise I am not here for you. Or rather, not here to do anything bad, at least, I mean." I was cut off from my apologetic rambling by a stiff shot to the back of my head. My eyes darkened, but I managed to retain consciousness as I fumbled on the ground, dropping the taser and hearing it slid away from where I lay prone on the floor. The woman screamed again as I heard heavy footsteps and looked up to see a large man blocking the exit. I thought I heard an amused chuckle as he kicked me in the ribs so hard I thought I would vomit them up. As I writhed on the ground, he took a step toward the woman and she fell back, trying to retain her composure but clearly confused and terrified of what she was seeing. I saw the feet of my attacker walk past me. He did not speak, but I knew what would happen if I didn't do anything. As he stomped forward menacingly toward the woman, I mustered up enough strength to grab the hammer from my pocket, push myself up enough to a crouched position, and swing hard for his legs. I was rewarded with a satisfying crack, and I made contact with his ankle, and I hoped I had broken it. There was a muffled cry of pain that almost sounded like a scream being put through a static filter and run at unhalf speed. The man in black crumpled to the floor to join me. The woman looked like she was going to try and intercede on my behalf, but the man produced a large knife, and when I saw the gleam of the blade, I shouted to her to run. She used the opportunity and leapt over us and out of there. I heard frantic cries for 911 outside, and then distressed screaming about how they were not answering. She was clearly trying to call for help, but was unable to get a call out. I saw the man turn to face me, and he wore a black face mask as well as clothes. The mask was disturbing. It had no features, just a plain blank face mask, but it seemed to have a weird sort of ambient static charge, like it could send out a jolt at any moment, and the weird buzzing sound when he spoke made it more unsettling. I could not see any of his real features underneath, but I heard an angry and pained grunt, and he raised the knife he had and came after me. I threw myself back at the wall, avoiding a stab directed at my heart. I had to disarm him, so I swung the hammer at his hand and managed to knock the blade free. In my moment of tactical satisfaction, I did not see his other hand balled into a fist, and he smashed me across the face with a brutal hook that left my ears ringing. I felt blood coming out of my nose, and he struck me several more times in the face. I tried to cover up, and he stomped my prone form. Strange static filled my head, and he bent down over me, and he proceeded to throttle me. I thought I was going to die, but I heard another strange grunt of amusement, and he suddenly stood up, somehow on his broken foot, and left. Before he was gone, he turned back and spoke in a manner I could actually understand despite the odd static. "Are you going to check your messages? It's for you." I gasped for breath and did not know how I was still alive or why he left. Then I saw the phone had a missed notification. It read, "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. You saved an innocent stranger from a beating and took one yourself. Admirable and stupid. Shouldn't say too much, but consider who you are really saving and why. Have to go now. You really should answer your phone. Someone's calling and it's rude not to pick up. M." I sat alone on the restroom floor, bloodied and confused as the message vanished, and the phone began to ring. I wiped the blood from my nose and answered the call. I held the phone up to my head with the arm that was not as injured, and heard a panicked voice call out on the line. "Help! There is a fire here and we are stuck in the building." A brief coughing fit interrupted the caller, no doubt due to smoke inhalation. I could hear an inferno in the background and they continued. "My name is Kylie Burke, and I'm a secretary at the Hope for the Future Research Center on 311 Lang Street. We don't know what happened, but a fire broke out and someone blocked the exits. We are stuck in here. We tried breaking the door down, but we can't, and it is getting hot to the touch. Help us! We are going to die unless you send the fire department now. Please help." I was not sure how I was going to stop a fire, but I would have to do something to prevent it in the first place. It sounded like details were scarce, and I was trying to think of what else to ask, to see if any more info could be gleaned when I heard the static and the panicked, "Hell! Oh, please! Hell! Us!" A loud crash signaled the end of the call, and the line was dead again. I had to find that building and do something to stop that fire. I did not know how many people were in that building besides Kylie, but it could be dozens or even hundreds, and they were likely all stuck and would be burned alive. My mind raced. Lots of things could start a fire, but I considered the blocked doors and the situation stank of some malicious influence. It might even be the same person who has been committing all of the other future crimes so far. He has been at every event, and my gut convinced me that he would be there, and he would likely be the one starting the fire. I pocketed my phone and tried to rise, but my whole body ached from being beaten almost lifeless. The shock and adrenaline of the fight and answering another call was starting to subside, and I was finally feeling just how injured I really was. As I tried to stand up, I fell back down with a shock that made my body writhe in pain. Just then, the woman I had saved from the attack earlier came back in and tried to help me. Her initial concern must have abated when she saw me try and defend her, though she still had a somewhat doubtful look on her face when dealing with me. She did seem to want to help now and said, "I am sorry, I can't get a hold of anyone. This place became a dead zone all of a sudden and I can't get the police or an ambulance here. It seems like you really need some medical attention. Thank you for stopping that man. But who was he and how did you know he was coming for me?" The question was a good one, and I struggled to come up with an answer that she would believe, since I couldn't exactly tell her I got a call from the future where she was likely dead. "Oh, I don't know who he was, but I saw him creeping around and thought he might be up to something when I saw him come in here. I am sorry for scaring you earlier." I introduced myself and she did the same. I learned her name was Bianca Sinclair, and she was a researcher at the Hope for the Future. That name was cropping up a lot. I wondered if maybe M was targeting people who worked there for some reason. This many employees being potential victims, it couldn't be a coincidence. I remembered what M said about how I should consider who you are really saving and why. I needed to get more information about what these people were doing and why they might be targeted. We moved out of the restroom and to a bench where we could await some help. The whole rest stop seemed to have no traffic today, so no one else came through to assist. The emergency line was still out, and Bianca was unable to call out to any other lines. We had been waiting so long it had been almost an hour, and we finally flagged someone else down. As soon as the woman approached us and she spoke, I recognized the voice as the one from the call, and I knew I had met Stacy Thomas. After introducing ourselves, Stacy had offered to go get help for us, but I did not have time to spend at the hospital despite my injuries, so I declined. I did ask her why she was heading into town, and apparently she had been coming this way to visit her family. It turned out her brother had just been killed, and she was going to be with her family to mourn his loss. I realized my hunch was likely confirmed, but just to make sure I asked what his name was, and when she told me I felt a wave of realization and despair. His name was Calvin Thomas, and he had been struck by a car and killed while cycling at night yesterday. As I was mulling in my own sense of sadness and defeat at the memory of how my actions had inadvertently led to his death, Bianca perked up at the mention of the name. "Calvin Thomas? You are his sister?" Stacy nodded and confirmed. "Yes, why?" "Well, your brother and I worked together, or worked, I should say. I am so sorry, that is terrible what happened." My ears perked up and I listened to them speak more about Calvin. Now to find out he worked for the Hope for the Future Foundation as well. It was all too much. Everyone I have met during this entire debacle has had some connection to this foundation. What were they anyway? I was in a unique position to find out more, since some workers were here with me now. I could glean more info and maybe see what was going on. Then I could follow up tomorrow at their facility, assuming I could keep it from burning to the ground. I tried to inquire about what sort of work the Foundation did, but Bianca was tight-lipped about it, and Stacy indicated her brother was never forthcoming in the sort of research they did there either. Just vague statements about research and development into new technologies and some renewable energy solutions, but few specifics. In the end, I did not know why someone would want to kill the people who worked there. I had some suspicions that Bianca was not telling me everything, though. I did not blame her. It was her work, and it was private. I could not tell her what I really knew about why I thought she might be in danger. But something happened there that has made them a target for whoever, or whatever M is. I had to make do with the knowledge I had, since I had another incident to stop tomorrow. Stacy departed as she had to get back on the road and said goodbye. Before Bianca could leave, I tried to ply her with some questions about her work. I did have a question about the Foundation. How many people worked at the Lang Ave building, and is it open tomorrow? Bianca regarded the question furtively and asked. Why do you want to know? I told her. Well, I just wanted to visit and see what sort of work is done there. I'm really interested in new technologies and innovation. I was not lying, at least not completely, but she had a doubtful look on her face. She tried to discourage me, but I was persistent. Please, I am very curious, and it could be a personal favor for me if you wanted to repay me for the help. I smiled, and the motion hurt my face after getting stomped recently. I could tell she felt sorry for me and relented. All right, I can take you on the investor tour, and if anyone asks you are a new shareholder, it's not open to public tourists. Thank you so much. I promise I won't be any trouble. It was sincere, since if things went the right way, I would be saving her and all her co-workers from a fiery fate. I had my way in now. I just needed to ensure I could evacuate those people on time or stop the first in the first place. Since I couldn't bring a fire engine to the site, I would have to make do with a visit at around the time shortly before the call. I needed to stop the fire before it happened. The next morning, Bianca and I set out to the Foundation. She spoke a little more on what they did, and the answers were not something I suspected. It sounded like some sort of sci-fi movie premise, but the hope for future Foundation was actually trying to research tachyons and the potential to send things forward or backward in time. I thought she was joking with me, but when I started to laugh, I saw the look of genuine sincerity, and my jaw almost hit the floor. I wondered just then if I should tell her about the phone. If she knew, maybe she could figure out how it's happening and why to me. It could not be a coincidence I get embroiled with some futuristic Foundation that can send things through time, and I just so happened to start receiving calls from the future. I decided to ask her something, trying not to give away too much. I know you probably could not confirm to the public, but has anyone really done it? I mean, sent an object back in time? She looked uncomfortable and responded with a curt, "That is classified, and why do you ask?" Just curious. I was also wondering if something like a phone or computer could be used to send a message from a different time to now using that method. Would that be possible? Her eyes narrowed, and I was afraid I said too much. That is a very specific suggestion. Why would you think that is something we could do? I just mumbled a feigned excuse under my breath, and then pointed to the building we were approaching like an impatient child and asked, "Is that it?" Hoping it would change the subject from my all-too-specific question. She nodded and looked away, clearly not fully trusting my distraction, but too polite to grill me on it. We had indeed made it to the Foundation. Bianca parked, and we got out and headed for the entrance. The building and attached grounds were massive, and I thought there might be around 100 or so staff members. I had to find a way to stop that fire. She led us through the main doors and got me a visitor pass, and I attached the card to my shirt. She told me up front that over 2/3 of the complex were off limits to visitors, and we would mostly be viewing office space and some of the nearly complete energy projects. She also insisted in no uncertain terms to not bring up any of the tachyon research or time travel in general. She said it could get her in big trouble if they found out she told someone outside the company. I promised to keep that information to myself, and thanked her again for taking me to visit. I stayed vigilant about the time and where we were. I saw fire suppression sprinklers and wondered if somehow the arsonist had tampered with them, and that is how it failed to put the fire out before it spread. More and more I felt I would need to try and stop this before it happened. If it spread, I did not know how I would keep everyone safe. We were walking down a corridor to the next section of the tour when a group of researchers in hazmat suits walked past us. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but I felt a strong static discharge around me as one of them passed by. My phone was vibrating too, and an all-too-familiar unsettling buzz was in the air. I looked back and I saw one of the hazmat suit-wearing scientists break off from The group and I saw the glimmer of a strange, hazy aura around their covered face. My heart sank. He was here. I stopped walking and Bianca looked back, wondering why I had paused. "What is it? What's wrong?" I did not know what to do or say. I could not explain it, but I somehow knew that was him. That was M. I couldn't tell Bianca yet, but I had to come up with something. I decided I would have to lie for the greater good. I think I smell smoke. I think there's a fire." She looked around and back at me and said, "I don't smell anything. What are you doing? Don't make a scene. You are going to get me in trouble." It was too late to go back now. I screamed, "Fire!" at the top of my lungs, and to my fortune, I found a discreetly placed fire alarm on the wall and, with one apologetic look back to Bianca, whose face had turned red with embarrassment on my behalf, I threw the switch, and the building came alive with the blaring of the fire alarm. An automated evacuation PA system informed us how to effect the building's evacuation in a timely and orderly fashion. Maintenance and security officers were running through the halls trying to find the source of the fire. When we got outside, Bianca pulled me off to the side, away from the larger groups of employees evacuating, and half scream, half whispered, "What the hell was that? Did you seriously have me take you here just to pull a prank on my entire workplace? Why did you do that? If they find out it was you and I let you in, I could be fired." She was fuming, and understandably so. I realized I would have to tell her the truth, and hopefully, considering her unique perspective, she would believe me. I promise I had a good reason. There was a fire, or rather there was going to be a fire. I know because I received an emergency phone call from the office's secretary, Kylie Burke, about a huge fire breaking out and the staff being locked inside somehow. I saw Bianca's eyes flash with recognition when I mentioned the name, but she still looked incredulous. Why would she call you, a stranger, about an emergency and not the fire department? And also, there is clearly no fire here now, so how and why would anyone think there was? I steeled myself to reveal the full truth and tried my best to not look as crazy as I felt. Because it has not happened yet, and I think I may have just stopped it. I think I did because the call about the fire came yesterday shortly after we met. Just like a call warning me you would be attacked in that bathroom, it came a day before it happened. I know it sounds crazy, but I pulled out my broken phone to illustrate the point. I have been getting 911 calls from people for emergencies that will happen exactly 24 hours after the call. I saw a mixture of emotions on her face. She clearly considered this and what I had said earlier about devices traveling through time. Then there was the nature of research they were doing there. She paused while processing all of this bizarre story. As she was about to respond to my insane confession, the phone vibrated, and right on time, always after the dust had settled, a message had arrived in the inbox of my phone. I told Bianca to stand close and look at the message before it disappeared. "Well then, good job you finally got the jump on me. Nice work with the alarm. Threw this place into a preemptive fire panic. I could still get a few of them if I went through with it, but not as effective now. I bet you are feeling proud of yourself, aren't you? Think you saved so many people. You bought them time, that's all. If you knew the true scope of what they have done here, you might not be so quick to play the role of savior. Nevertheless, well played. No collateral even. You are almost there. Keep your eyes open and be ready for what happens next. M." I felt anxiety bubbling at the threat of what happens next, but I looked at Bianca, who was scrutinizing the message, and then watched in confusion as the message vanished shortly afterward, leaving no trace and no UI on screen to even attempt to look for it again. Just dead black. I tried to break the ice on her confused state of bewilderment by stating that person messages me after every event. They seem to be setting this all up like some weird test, but I don't know to what end. The victims have almost been exclusively people who work at this foundation. Do you have any idea who might be targeting researchers here at your work? Bianca considered the question, and then, as if mulling over the message in her mind a bit more, I heard her mumble, No, it couldn't be." She turned back to me and flatly stated, "We need to talk. I think I know what could be happening, and if he is still alive, no one here is safe anymore." My mind raced and my heart rose. She knew something, and maybe we could put a stop to this insanity after all. I leaned forward and eagerly said, "Tell me everything." Once the bedlam from the fire alarm died down, Bianca took me back into the building. She spoke to some of the security personnel, and I was escorted into one of the restricted sections. She turned back to me with a look of obvious anxiety. "We need to go to my office. It will be safe there to discuss what I think is happening. After we do that, though," she paused, making sure she had my attention, "we will need to bring this matter to the Foundation directors. The situation is a potential danger to the entire establishment and all the personnel associated with it, as well as who knows how many others. I nodded my head, not wanting to force her to speak more on the matter until we were in a secure setting, though I was anxious to learn what she knew about what the hell was going on. I did not have to wait too long. We walked through a network of halls leading further in. The halls gave way to a secure, bunker-like wing of the facility. Entering an enormous security door, I had to do a double-take as we passed by several arrays of odd-looking technology in the background. I was about to ask Bianca what they were, but as I looked at her, she seemed to be getting more nervous as we moved on. We suddenly veered left, and a small door was visible with the number 12 on it. She swiped a keycard she had in her coat, and an electronic lock disengaged, and we moved into a small office with thick, dull grey walls and minimal decorations. A desk, computer, and various books lay strewn among the surface of a plain metal desk, and Bianca gestured for me to sit in the chair opposite hers. I obliged, and as soon as I sat down, she had pen and paper in hand and ready to take notes on whatever we discussed, presumably. I was about to ask her what was really going on when she asked the first question. Where did you find the device? I mean the phone. Was it acquired recently? Well, I didn't find it. It's my phone. I dropped it down a small flight of stairs near my work. It broke, of course, and after breaking it started doing this. But what exactly? She cut me off again and started in with another barrage of questions. Are you able to use it to send any message or call? Do any other functions remain? How many calls have you received? How many messages from this M person? I was starting to get frustrated. Hey, I thought you were going to be telling me what happened. I already told you what I know. I don't know how this works. I have been receiving these calls for a few days, and in each case, there has been a call for help to emergency services that somehow comes to my phone. It is always about something exactly 24 hours before it happens, and I have tried to stop almost all of them. Now, if you don't mind, would you tell me who the hell you think M is? She looked down at her papers and back at me with a plaintive sigh, as if she was not sure if she should humor me in things I would not understand. I tried not to take offense to it, but she was getting more and more impatient with me as we went on. I'm sorry I got carried away. I know you must want answers. It is just that this situation is very sensitive and well. She paused again, her impatience giving way to that same concerned look from earlier. You must understand that what I can tell you is limited. Many things are strictly confidential, and what I do tell you must never leave this building. I nodded my head again, and she continued. Good. Well, as I stated before, this foundation has been researching radical new technologies that would revolutionize and change the world as we know it. One of the most significant projects under our purview was Project Echo. This initiative was led by one of our best, a brilliant man named Dr. Roland Merck. Merck was not only the director of Project Echo, but the mastermind behind the research involved in its inception. This project was an attempt to successfully send an object back in time using a tachyon transmitter. Merck was a genius in the field of temporal research and experimentation. This project of his had even reached the point where the experiments involving the proposed goal of transporting objects forward or backward through time were becoming genuinely possible. All that was left was a practical test of the device, but she trailed off, her tone shifting from one of admiration to tragic concern while she continued. There was a terrible accident that occurred during the first fateful attempt. An energy spike threatened to destroy the project and set us back years in our efforts. Dr. Merck broke the safety quarantine in an effort to shut it down and save the device, save his life's work. It was too late, however, and Dr. Merck ended up being wholly disintegrated on an atomic level, along with the devices he was carrying. We continued following up on his project, but he has been dead as far as we knew for over a year. At least it seemed he was until now. Considering this mysterious attacker who is able to predict things before they happen and is targeting Foundation members, along with leaving the initial M in a message, well, it suggests an outcome we did not expect. I could not believe the insane tale that was being told to me, secret time travel research. This was crazy stuff, yet it was hard not to try and believe some of it, considering what I had experienced so far. How else was my broken phone receiving calls from the future? But that begged the question, why am I able to receive the calls though, and how or why is this dead scientist returned from beyond, contacting me after my efforts to prevent disasters that he might very well be orchestrating? She looked at me, and then her notes, and responded, that is the question. Remarkably, it seems he is not dead, but actually made it back through time in a very corporeal way. Why he has contacted you, I am not sure. I considered her answer, but was still very confused on one detail in particular. M's motive? If he is back, why would he be trying to kill you all? Shouldn't he be trying to get in contact and share his discovery and not murder the faculty? She seemed caught off guard by my question and looked away to her papers while giving me a dismissive sounding, "I don't know why he would wish to kill his former co-workers. Perhaps the process of phasing between time has damaged his mind, and he is lashing out at the people who he can remember. Maybe he blames the Foundation for letting it happen to him in the first place, I don't know." The explanation did not sound authentic, and I felt like she was holding something back. I did not push the subject, but I knew there was more to M, or I should say Merrick, and his motivations. "Now that you have your answers, I'm going to need you to come with me and speak to the board and see what they think we should do." "All right, but what else do you need from me?" I asked, feeling more uncomfortable as I sat there, not knowing what was going to happen to me or what M might try to do next. "We just need to see what the board suggests we do now that the facility might be compromised. This is a serious situation, and it has been shown that you are not entirely safe either, despite his attempts at communicating with you." We left Bianca's office and walked down a corridor to a large antechamber that looked more like a military command and control center. There were armed guard and scientists everywhere. Cables snaked in every direction, and the thrum of energy could practically be felt in the room upon entering. Several scientists sat around a table discussing and murmuring things to each other, and Bianca approached them slowly. "Directors, I apologize for the suddenness of this meeting, but we have a serious situation." She paused briefly, waiting for the entire group of members at the table to turn their attention to her. "I have uncovered evidence that suggests that Dr. Merrick is still alive, and worse, he has come back here and made contact with a temporal anomaly. He seems to be contacting someone through the anomaly and is trying to kill faculty members." There was a mixture of gasps, dismissive chuckles, and stern grunts as the collected board members digested the news they had received. A tall man sitting at the head of the table held up a hand, and the rest of them quieted down. If Merrick has come back somehow and his memory is intact, he will have remembered what happened. He is likely already plotting some kind of revenge on all of the members of Project Echo, which led to his unfortunate accident. It is also likely he was responsible for Calvin and Michael S. deaths. Put the facility on high alert, and we need to do something about this madman. I heard the names spoken and remembered the first two victims. I knew they worked here, but did both men work on this Project Echo? What did they do to Merrick besides failing to save him from getting zapped by a machine? Another voice chimed in. "What about the anomaly you mentioned? Is it still intact and still here?" Bianca paused a moment, looking uncomfortable, and then pointed to me. I held up my hands and started to panic. What were they going to do to me? "No, wait, I don't know what you all think I am, but I did not sign up for any of this. I just broke my phone and was trying to get a new one from the store before I got the first of those weird calls." I pulled out the phone and everyone took a step back like I had just drawn a gun on them. There was a high-pitched beeping from one of the machines nearby, and an attendant looked at the screen and then back at me, and his jaw dropped. They clearly knew something about this thing that I didn't. I had to take a chance to try and get out of the situation, so I told them, "If I give you guys this broken phone, can I leave? It sounds like you need it and not me." There were murmurs and whispered conversations, and when most of their heads began shaking in disapproval, I knew I was in trouble. Bianca spoke again. "It would be best if you gave us the device and came with us to a holding cell. If Merrick is going to contact you again, we need to know. He might only talk to you, and we need to find him, track him, and stop him. So, you are going to need to come with us." She said it all with a pained expression of resignation, clearly not wanting to have me taken into custody, but not being able to go against the director's orders. "Wait, hold me? No way. You don't have the right to detain me. I haven't done anything wrong, and you are a goddamn research facility. You are not the government, are you?" My rant was met by stony faces and no answer to my question. My heart sank, and I realized that these people were serious. "I don't understand this. You are saying there's some time-manipulating madman trying to kill everyone here, and you want to lock me up and take away the only device that has given me an edge?" I was getting more scared and confused by the moment. This turnaround and Bianca's betrayal of trust was especially painful, though in the end she did not have too much of a choice. As the guards moved in, I kept speaking to try and convince them. "What are you going to do about him? Why is he really trying to kill you all?" The director stood up and brushed off his coat and responded with a dismissive, "I'm afraid the rest is classified. Get this man out of here and confiscate the device. We will need to run some tests on it. If Merrick calls, bring it back to him and put both of them in the tracking room." Several guards moved towards me. I was about to be taken away when the phone vibrated, and I pulled it out to look at the screen, now come to life. The security personnel backed away at the urging of the scientists, since they did not want the device damaged, which I found ironic since I broke the thing already, and that's what started this mess. The director spoke again, more concerned with the phone than anything else. "What does it say?" he asked with genuine interest. I read the message but did not say anything out loud. It just said, "Duck!" On instinct, I followed the command and grabbed Bianca's arm and pulled her down as well. We both hit the floor, and a large structural beam crashed down and swung into the room, smashing into all of the guards and several scientists. It missed the board members by inches, and we only narrowly avoided being crushed by abiding the warning from the message. The director at the head of the table stood up and shouted, "Arrest that man and get that phone." I heard guards mobilizing nearby, and I did not need any more prompting from there. I ran. Bianca considered following for a moment, then held onto my hand as if considering restraining me. She ended up letting go with a look of sad resignation and muttered the words, "Go, quick!" I started sprinting down the main hall and was about to run headlong into a group of guards when my phone messaged me again and said, "Stop, down to the ground." Once again, I followed the instruction. As the guard charged in to seize me, a panel on the wall exploded and a current or electrical energy bolted through. All the guards and violently electrocuted them until they lay on the ground smoldering. The smell of burning skin and ozone was horrifying, and I checked myself to find I was somehow unharmed. I managed to get away down a random technical corridor. I could not see anyone, but they were closing in by the sounds of footsteps. I ducked into a supply room to hide. As I huddled in the corner, I could not believe it when my phone started ringing again. It was a particularly bad time for a call, but I answered it all the same. It sounded incredibly distorted, and I could barely hear through all the static. "Hello 911, I would like to report an emergency." I got out my notepad and got ready, but I heard another static burst. "Did you want to know?" "Come again?" "Did I want to know what? What happened? Is someone injured?" The voice continued, and an awful static squelch almost deafened me. "Just kidding. You really are the real deal, running for your life, but still takes a call to try and help someone. Anyway, did you want to know what really happened?" The voice altered again, and I realized it was mostly likely M that I was speaking with. "I'm just calling to say, it's not 24 hours this time. These people are going to die. My wife and children, myself, we all die due to their negligence. If you do exactly what I tell you, you can hear the other side of the story. Then you will have to decide if they are worth saving. You have no idea what they have done, or worse, what they will do. The emergency this time is that the Hope for the Future main research building has a device that contains such a prodigious amount of energy that if overloaded could obliterate this facility and a surrounding 4 to 5 miles. It is going to explode, and there's nothing those murdering, brainwashing, immoral maniacs can do about it this time. I will get you out of there and you will have 3 options. Use the next hour to get as far away as possible and save yourself, which I doubt you will pick." I heard a static-laden chuckle that hurt my ear. "Second option, you can meet me at the observation tower outside Building 2. There I can tell you the real truth of what happened, and you can decide what you will do on their behalf. Third option, you can listen to their lies, try and stop me and fail, or worse, go willingly into their custody, and they can proceed to disavow knowledge you were ever here while they experiment on you, and you find some horrible way to die in their custody, not knowing why you ever tried to save them. I know you will make the right choice. I have faith, do you?" Before I could say a word in response, the line went dead, and I was left with an impossible task. I had to stop him from killing all these people. Despite their attempts at abducting me, they did not deserve to die in a fiery explosion, especially not Bianca, though I did not exactly trust them either, and M had said something about them killing his family and others. There were enough serious accusations and evidence to give me pause in trusting either the Foundation or M. Though I could not help but consider, what did he know? I had to make a decision one way or the other. Time was running out. My mind was racing. I did not have much time as I considered what to do. First, I had the pressing matter of escaping the facility. I had to leave and find M. I had to find out what he knew. While plotting a means of escape, I got another message on the phone. I read the message and saw a longer message than normal. It looked like instructions. You might want to write this down and follow these steps exactly. Write fast, since the message won't stay on the phone very long. Open the door in exactly 1 minute and 52 seconds after this message is gone. Turn right and go toward a maintenance closet. There will be a tunnel connecting it to main access concourse. Ignore the steam and any exploding pipes. That is just some cover for you. Don't take too long, since if it dissipates, a group of about a dozen guards will see you and likely catch you if you are not fast enough. Keep heading down the main path and take a left to find an employee locker room. There is a hazmat suit that will help disguise you and security credentials in case anyone asks. Head to the main bulkhead and place the phone on the power junction and wait for the door to open. There might be a hissing sound that is normal. Head out the main door and move along the northeast road to get to the path to Building 2. I will be waiting for you and your decision at the top of the watchtower. I finished writing down the instructions just as the message vanished. I looked at my hastily scrawled copy and remembered I needed to start counting. I did not have a stopwatch, and obviously my phone wouldn't work, so I counted and hoped I would get it right. At the moment I reached 1 minute and 52 seconds, I threw the door open and ran. I moved per the instructions that I had tried to commit to memory in the brief time I had. I was moving as quickly as I figured I was supposed to be moving, and I reached the main access path. I almost fell back and suppressed a gasp of surprise as several armed guards were visible on the other side of the path. Something was wrong. There was supposed to be some sort of steam cover. I tried to carefully step back around the corner, but I heard a voice yell out to "Stop!" I was about to run back the way I had come from, when that same voice turned into a scream as I saw several pipes around the guard's head explode in unison. He was enveloped in scalding steam that burned him so severely he fell down into an agony-induced sort of coma. I had no idea if he was alive, but I did not have time to check. The other guards had heard his shouted warning and were on alert. I took the opportunity to flee down the corridor. Sure enough, when I reached the locker room, it was empty of personnel, and a single hazmat suit was draped over a bench near the back corner. I put it on as quickly as I could and pocketed the key card that was with it as well. I found the main bulkhead door and placed the phone near the power junction, and the hissing sound was almost immediate. I did not like the sequence of other sounds that began to carry through the machinery, but I had no time to worry about it, so I moved on. I hustled toward the main exit, and guards were still moving about, but no one seemed to question me as I moved out. When I had almost exited the building, I looked back and felt a pang of guilt. I had to know what was really going on, but could I really endanger all these people? I did not know what M was really capable of, but I thought that maybe I should at least warn someone. I decided to approach the front desk and speak to the receptionist on my way out. She looked confused as I approached, no doubt wondering what a high-level scientist, at least according to my fake credentials, was asking of her. "Yes, can I help you, sir?" I recognized the voice immediately. It was Kylie Burke, the same woman who I had received the emergency call from about the fire I had prevented. "Yes, ma'am, I need you to deliver a message to Dr. Bianca Sinclair." I wrote a quick message in my notes telling her about the danger to the facility and that they should evacuate and get everyone out of there as soon as possible. I folded the note and gave it to Kylie Burke and asked her to deliver it immediately. She looked confused, but I did not have time to explain, so I shouted, "Now, that is an order." And she took the paper and left with a scared and apologetic look. I felt bad for yelling at her, but unfortunately it had become a matter of life and death, and time was not on our side. I needed enough time to get out of there without a commotion, so I couldn't tell her directly of the threat. I hoped by the time Bianca read the note, or Miss Burke did, they would know about the threat, and hopefully start getting people out of the building in time before whatever M had planned occurred and the whole place was blown away. I rushed out of the building and toward the path leading to the watchtower. I could see it in the distance, beckoning me to my fate and whatever answers the enigmatic M had in store for me. I reached the base of the tower, and I heard alarms sounding in the distance back at the main building. I hoped those were evacuation sirens. I started ascending the tower, and I felt a familiar thrumming of energy and a static charge that made my teeth hurt. It felt like I was moving the wrong direction in snapshots that are arranged out of sequence. I knew that meant he was close. Reaching the top of the tower, I saw him with his back turned, looking down at the facility's grounds. "There you are, my friend. I knew you would make it. A little bit late, but that's okay. I think I owe you an apology. I'm sorry. I had to know. I had to know that you would make the right decision. You were a variable, but I had faith you would do the right thing. Isn't that what you are here to do now? The right thing?" M turned to face me, and the black hood was down, and I looked at the face of the man at least where a normal face should have been. What I saw in place of a face was a kaleidoscope of unnatural colors and hues, not natural to this plane of existence, and it made my eyes hurt. The wrongness of his entire being was palpable. He did not exist in this place or time, yet here he was, an impossibility made possible. I had no idea what to do or say. My mind had gone blank. I managed to think back to the one question I had been asking myself this entire time. Why me? Why was I the one you contacted? He gave a chuckle which was partly phased out by some unseen force and rendered half of it silent. He spoke once, his voice returned. Right place, right time, I suppose. That phone was on me when I was atomized. Somehow it can back as well, but it became unstable and I could not hold on to it anymore. When I woke up from the blast, I tried to call 911 and get emergency services down to the building. That was when I realized I couldn't. I had been blasted out of time and reappeared in this unstable form. He held out his arms, and I saw the odd array of impossible glimmers of half-reality radiating off of him. He continued. The phone reached someone or something, but as it did, it became more unstable. It started reacting to the temporal energy I was surrounded by, so I had to get rid of it. It was too dangerous to just leave with anyone, so I took a chance. When I saw you drop your phone down that flight of stairs, I used the moment to switch phones with you. M pulled out a phone that looked just like the one I had been carrying, but after he threw it to me and I booted it up, I realized this was my original phone. I had been carrying his phone this whole time, and this device had apparently traveled through time. He watched my confusion and made an approximation of laughter again and continued. So not really a specific reason, though I will say you did not disappoint. As soon as you knew what was happening, you did your best to stop all the death you could. That is an admirable quality, which is why I trust that you will continue to try and stop the things yet to come. This foundation, hope for the future. It has a rot that will lead it and the rest of the world into damnation. I know. I have seen it, both the way it begins and ends. He took a step forward and held out a hand, gesturing to the building below and the entire foundation grounds. We had good intentions to start. If we were able to utilize this technology to tap unharvested resources out of time, we could have a potentially endless supply of energy. That was the plan, at least, until the intentions of the board had changed, due to the machinations of the warmongers, the scientists that worked with defense contractors and only saw the way this could be adapted to military use. The scope of their plan for my research was shifted. He seemed to trail off and looked off into the sky above. I was about to ask him to continue when he spoke again. I saw the thing that they will do, if left to their own devices. I have seen what they will enact with my life's work if they are allowed to. They wanted to try and transport living being through time. I explained the potential harm in sending a living being backwards or forwards in time. Do you know what they end up doing? He spun around and began raving. They recruit children and brainwash them while accelerating their growth rates using the device to make soldiers that could be manipulated from birth and grow so quickly that it would give them another limitless resource besides energy. People. They use this temporal manipulation to create a large army of these child soldiers, among other atrocities. My own son gets taken and forced into the same program. He dies shortly afterward. My wife tries to put a stop to the Foundation, but she is silenced as well. He paused and spat on the ground and looked back at me intently, and the horrible visage grew even worse. That's not all, M said while watching me recoil at his previous admission. Their plans devolve further if they are successful. The future becomes a dystopia where the Foundation controls nearly all the levers of power and essentially becomes the main force behind the government and the nation's military. They rule almost unopposed and delve into even more unethical practices. All this being enabled by their exploitation of my life's work, the temporal transmitter. It is still intact, and they will eventually manage to reactivate it, and when that happens, he trailed off again, clenched his fist and resumed. Before that happens, they must be stopped, and the only way to ensure they are is if the entire rotten tree is felled. His visage took on an eerie quality as he stood there staring intently at me while he declared his homicidal plans. In a few years, they change the state of the world. In a few decades, their manipulation ends up leaving the world a war-torn and blasted hellscape. They deserve a death far worse than what I am providing them. I took an involuntary step back at the horrific implications of what he was saying. If that was what the future had in store, we were all in real trouble. I agreed that the device needed to be destroyed, along with his research, but condemning everyone that worked there seemed a step too far. I summoned my courage and stepped forward, asking him, "What do you need from me? Why do you need my help or think I would help you kill all those people?" He pointed at me and said, "You have a choice. You can decide. I know that in tough decisions you can make the hard call. Well, you have to make the call now. Kill hundreds to save billions. You already set this in motion. When you placed the phone on the main power junction, you sent a remote bundle of temporal energy into the device's main generator. When this is triggered, it will annihilate the building and everyone in it. It is all controlled by the phone. I had to abandon the phone because the energy it contains is harmful to me now. Yet it still contains great power beyond receiving message from out of time. Power that I had to entrust to someone. I needed someone I could trust to do the right thing. That someone is you. You have to save us and save the world. All you have to do is dial 911 and boom! A genuine smile spread on his tortured features, and it looked the worst by far. I returned his gaze and asked him, why not destroy the device and let the people go? Why do they need to die? You cannot know for certain that everyone who works there is corrupt or would even be able to do any real damage without the device and your research. Instantly he snarled and responded, no, I have seen what they can do, what they will do, even the most mundane of workers. All of them bow to power and tacitly endorse the monstrous regime with their inaction. They all have to die. Now make the choice. I had no idea if my message had been headed or what the status was on people evacuating the building. I saw a lot of vehicles moving about, but still too many there. I couldn't do this, not now. I shook my head and just said, no, I can't do it. I won't. Not everyone is guilty of what you say they did, or what you say they are going to do. You can't know for certain that given another way, they would not do better and be better. I will help you destroy the machine, but I won't kill those people. M's thoughtful regard for my response faded into a dour, scrutinizing look that seemed multiplied by the shimmering distortion around his horrible features. You are making a mistake. They have to die. Quick and painless now, which only you can afford them. Or slow and painful later if I have to hunt them all down like I have been. Doing especially for the turncoats who betrayed me and stole my work on Project Echo. I stood my ground and tried to get him to focus on me. But my plan had failed, and he saw through the ruse as he looked out and saw people fleeing from the building. What did you do? He screamed at me, and the crackling distortion around him intensified. I obliged his question. I warned them. I am not on their side or yours. They can escape and you can destroy the machine and they can't recreate it. At least not as far as we know, so you don't need to kill them. You can still walk away from this. You don't need to keep killing. I watched his response and tried to tell if I had gotten through, but a moment of thoughtfulness was replaced by a snarl of anger, and he lashed out again. It was that bitch Sinclair, wasn't it? I should have killed her when I had the chance, but I thought she would get hers when the building is annihilated. You don't know her like I do. You can't trust her. She will kill you as soon as you become inconvenient to her, just like she did to me. I was concerned about what he had said about Bianca, but whatever her story, she and the rest of the people there deserved to live. They could not all be killed for a crime they had not even commit. I reiterated my intent. I warned them to evacuate. I told her, and she knows about you now. The other directors want you dead, but she is different. She is trying to get people out of there now. Give her time and wait, and I promise I will help destroy the device. Just let them go. I saw immediately that he was shaking his head. They cannot be forgiven. I know what is in their hearts and minds. I have seen their actions. People do no change like that. If they are capable of that degree of evil, it is because it is already in them. I wish you had seen through the lies. I wish you had put the rest of the world ahead of these liars and monsters. Now I will have to make it right. I will have to stop them permanently. He moved forward toward the ladder and I stepped in front of him. I can't let you go after them. Not anymore. I will not let you keep hunting and killing these people. M paused and looked me up and down and smiled. Are you going to stop me from doing it? We all know how that went last time. I tried to stand firm, but he was right. Whatever energy was fueling him made him nearly immune to damage, and he had beaten the hell out of me last time. I had to do it, though. I had to stop him. I planted my feet and held up my hands. Before I could perceive him moving, M was next to me. He grappled me and twisted around in an effortless motion that allowed him to leverage my weight easily. I was promptly hurled off my feet into a heap on the edge of the tower, nearly falling off the edge. I pulled myself back in the nick of time as a stomp leveled at my head crushed into the tower's railing. He began pummeling me into the ground just like before. I knew he would not hold back. He had no more use for me. He was going to kill me. I had one last chance. I rolled hard to my side as his fists slammed into the area where my head had been. I grabbed the phone from my pocket and gripped it in both hands and punched him with it, and the blow connected. He cried out in pain and surprise. There was an odd distortion of energy upon contact. I considered that maybe the phone did have some strange ability to affect his powers. He struck back and knocked the wind out of me with a punch to the gut. I thought I heard my ribs breaking. I was running out of options and knew I might die, so I tried something desperate. I stood up near the edge and held up a hand to taunt him into attacking. He obliged and charged at me, but I held up the phone dove to the side and whirled around to catch him unbalanced. I threw the phone at him, and he instinctively caught it, and I leapt forward, while he was vulnerable, and jumped and drop-kicked him straight off the tower. There was a long, torturous, buzzing scream and then a horrible crunch, and when I looked down, I saw that the phone had disrupted his abilities enough for gravity to finish the job. After coming back to life through time and space, Roland Merrick was once again dead. I slowly descended the tower, my body aching with the effort. I saw the ruined form of Merrick on the ground. The phone was on his chest and had survived the fall somehow. I reverently picked it back up and turned it over in my hands. This thing had saved my life, but I still did not know the full extent of its bizarre abilities. My reverie was disrupted when I saw a car approaching. Bianca and a group of the Foundation's security disembarked. She walked up slowly and gasped when she saw the ruined form of Merrick on the ground. She gingerly stepped around him and spoke to me with a faint smile on her face. "The building has been evacuated, but it looks like you handled it." I nodded grimly but did not respond. I was too lost in thought. I got in the car with Bianca and we drove away to a safe location. Bianca and I got out of the car and she asked me about what happened. I told her everything that had happened and she was shocked by the outcome but seemed happy that I was okay. I asked her what she would do next, and she was thoughtful for a moment and told me, "Now that Merrick is dead, the Foundation will be more responsible with his technology to ensure this does not happen again." My mind wandered back to what he had said about what happens in the future, and I knew there was one more thing I had to ask her. "What are you going to do with that device? It is clearly not safe, and the damage it could do is catastrophic. Maybe we should destroy it." Her smile vanished, and she considered her next words and spoke again. "Merrick has created a marvel that can serve us all. With the Foundation's leadership, we can seize the future and give hope to everyone." As I heard the speech, I had finally decided on what I was going to do. I had made my choice. I took the phone out and looked at Bianca and smiled. "Yeah, I heard a story about that once. I think I know the ending. This device, all that seeing the future or getting calls from it and all this mess, it is too dangerous for people to meddle in." Bianca looked confused and tried to reassure me. "Well, you can trust us. Don't worry, we will not make the same mistakes." I looked back in the direction of the facility, now safely evacuated, and likely waiting on the orders of Bianca and the board to resume their work. I smiled, looked down at the device in my hand, dialed 911 and hit send. There was a mushroom cloud-sized explosion visible in the car windows behind us, and it rocked the car and nearly sent us off the road. Bianca looked back horrified at what had happened, and then looked to me with a confused and angry expression. "I know you won't. No one will ever again. Whatever the intentions, no one should hold that power, and no one should know the future." After it was all over, I returned home. I faced no reprisal for my action against the Foundation. Maybe they had disbanded after the incident, or maybe they are still working towards a similar end. I don't know, but at this point I would rather not know anyway. I do not receive the calls anymore on the phone. Both my original and the trans-dimensional phone are finally, truly dead. I was fired from my day job for not showing up thanks to all of my misadventures, so I am in a tough spot now that it is over. Since I need a new job after all this madness, I figure maybe I will get a job as a 911 dispatcher. After all, I have some experience on the job. Whatever the case, I'm glad I don't know what will happen anymore. No one should have that burden, and no one should be able to alter fate. Take care and stay safe. There is no official record of the exorcism we performed at 1237 Palmer Avenue in Los Angeles last November. The church encourages us not to speak to the press about such things anyway, as our work tends to be sensationalized. In truth, most cases we investigate aren't possessions at all, just ordinary, tragic mental health issues wearing the trappings of religion. I was still only a year into my apprenticeship back then. Up to that point, even in the few instances when I'd witnessed a genuine possession, the process of exorcism was far more mundane than the movies would have you believe. My mentor, Father Anthony, would simply follow the protocols as outlined by the Holy See. sprinkling with holy water, laying of hands, and exfoliation, along with the recitation of the prescribed prayers. Only once had I seen the basic prayers fail. It was a case where the entity within an elderly woman had been allowed to fester possibly as long as 5 years. The family had spent half a decade ignoring the problem, ascribing it to ordinary dementia, even as her behavior grew worse and worse. We had been called in after she'd twisted the head off a beloved family cat, all while invoking the names of minor demons she had no business knowing. Even then, Father Anthony had been able to remove the demon in less than a week, relying on the prayer to St. Michael and a silver cross that had once belonged to Pope Leo XIII. Nothing could have prepared either of us for what we found on Palmer Avenue. We were sent there at the behest of Father Felipe, a parish priest who noticed that Maya Knowles, one of the young women attending his church, had missed several weeks of Sunday Mass. It's unfortunately common for young people to fall out of love with the faith, but it raised a small flag for the Father Felipe, who caught up with her mother, Sharon, one day after Mass, to ask her if anything was wrong. Sharon immediately burst into tears, confessing that her previously bright, cheerful daughter had become a recluse overnight, refusing to leave her room. Again, such things happen, but it aroused the Father Felipe's interest, and he paid the family a visit a few days later. What he witnessed upon entering the girl's room was enough to make him call us immediately. Rather than paraphrase, I'll include a transcription of the voicemail he left here. There was a foul smell. It hit you all the way down the hall, some kind of cocktail of sweat and excrement. It grew more powerful as I approached Maya's room, such that I was hesitant to enter. At the doorway I hesitated. That's when I heard the awful growling, like an animal's stomach, left empty far too long. Nothing about it sounded the least bit human. I said a prayer and entered. The girl, I almost hesitate to call her that now, had been beautiful when I last saw her, so much so that she'd been the subject of several confessions from teenage boys in the parish, all unable to take their eyes off of her. Adult men, too. Her mother had been pushing her toward a career in modeling, television, something I warned them both about. Pride, the dangers of the superficial. Of course, I'm a priest in LA. I have many such conversations. I will say that Maya's mother was particularly obsessed with her daughter's career in a way that gave me pause, but I felt that if I confronted her too harshly about the subject, I might push her away from the faith entirely. When I walked into the room, I had to suppress my urge to vomit. Maya lay in a bed in the center of the dark bedroom. Something, its texture uneven and smudged with fingerprints, had been rubbed and dried over the windows, blocking out the light. Despite the near dark, I could just make out Maya's skeletal form, her skin clinging like tissue to her bones, exposing every crease. The growling sound was emanating from her stomach and up her throat, the low pitch more like the death row of some great beast than a teenage girl. There was a scratching sound filling the room too, and when I looked closer, I realized that she was weakly moving her arm, grabbing handfuls of dry rice from a 50-pound bag by her side. She moved her hand to her lips, eating the dry rice whole before going back for another handful. Looking around by her bedside, I saw at least 6 or 7 similar bags littered on the floor. "Like what you see?" she asked me. "Of course not. I'm not exactly your type, am I? Couldn't get hard for a girl like me if you tried. Maybe worth a shot, though. Why don't you come a little closer? Give me a little kiss." I knew in that moment that I was in mortal danger. Behind me, the door began to close on its own accord, and as I reached back to stop it, it slammed shut. I heard the crunch of bone as my fingers smashed in the doorframe. The break was bad enough that I could see the white of my bone through the skin, and I was bleeding profusely. Suddenly the girl was up, without a sound. She'd moved to the foot of the bed, her legs, no thicker than pool cues, dangling over the side. "You smell amazing, Father," she said. She stood, and her posture was bent, unnatural. One of her knees seemed to bend the opposite way. One of her arms seemed to have broken in so many places that it flapped like a tentacle. With my good hand, I pulled the door open as hard as I could, trying to free my limp fingers and escape before she could reach me. She stepped deliberately. I sensed that she could move faster if she desired, but she enjoyed watching me squirm. Almost without thinking, I began to recite a Hail Mary in the original Latin, something that has always brought me peace. As the words exited my mouth, I could tell that Maya was bothered, even taking a small step back. "Shut up," she was muttering. "Shut up about that bitch." But I refused to stop, and as I did, I was able to pry the door open, a little at a time. Then all at once, Maya was screaming, commanding me to close my mouth. Suddenly the door flew open, and I stumbled through, shutting it behind me as fast as I could. After that, there was only silence. No one has heard a thing from inside the room since then. I have instructed Maya's mother to avoid going inside at all costs. We need help, desperately. A strange look had crossed Father Anthony's face after he heard the message. He went to consult a few old books in his personal library as I listened to the message on repeat, trying to sift through the details. "How bad is it?" I asked when he returned. "It is what it is," he said. "The protocols are clear. We go. We evaluate. Should it turn out to be a major exorcism, we will use the prayer to St. Michael for as long as it takes. Pack your large suitcase. It may be a while." "Father," I asked, "has the prayer ever failed to remove the entity?" He shook his head. "Demons are cowards by nature. With some luck, within a few weeks it will flee, just as its brethren have before." Father Anthony and I were different in our faith. Mine was almost like romance, swelling one day and waning the next, ever present but varying vastly depending on my mood. His was steady. To Father Anthony, the universe was perfectly ordered, bound by immutable laws. To him, the prayers always worked. Just as one pool ball colliding with another would predictably transfer its force, so too would his prayers send demons reeling. "You look worried," he said as I played the message again. "Don't. It's unseemly for a man of the cloth. Pack your bag. By now, you should know that time is critical." Though he was almost steady as always, I noticed a slight tick as he spoke, like his mouth couldn't stop twitching. Looking down, I saw he was carrying a small pouch of red velvet that I'd never seen before. "Just a precaution," he said. "Hopefully something we don't need until much further into your training." I never expected to become an exorcist. My family wasn't even Catholic growing up. My parents were hippie types, mercurial in their beliefs. For a while, we attended a Baptist church. Then, just as I'd finally learned all of the lyrics to the hymns, we moved 2 towns away, where my mum got swept up in the Kabbalah and tried to drag us all into it with her. Before I was a teenager, I'd spent a day or two in a mosque, a Swinomish smokehouse and a Gnostic temple. It was my wife, Sophia, who brought me into the faith. She had grown up in a big Italian-American family in New York, and for her Catholicism was the same as family. I converted to marry her. All it took was a few months of classes and a ceremony on Easter. I didn't even ask myself if I believed in God. It was enough to believe in Sophia. She was a true believer in the best sense of the word, generous to a fault, always exhausting herself, trying to keep us all happy. All year, she sewed quilts, using them as Christmas presents or baby shower gifts. Several times, she tried to teach me how to sew, but I was hopeless, clumsy. She loved me anyway. Then, one Thanksgiving, after staying up far too late drinking wine and prepping vegetables, she woke up and decided to run to the store for pre-made dinner rolls. It was icy. She wasn't even speeding, but it didn't matter. She skidded into oncoming traffic at the wrong time. She died instantly. After she was gone, none of my usual crutches dulled the pain. Alcohol, throwing myself into work, exercise, it all felt hollow, insufficient to replace Sophia. We held a funeral mass shortly after she died, and it was the first time I felt an ounce of peace. The light streaming in from the stained-glassed windows suddenly seemed different to me, as if heaven were actually on the other side if I could just step through them. I found myself going to church more often after that. Not just on Sundays, but on weekdays too, right after work. I'd watch the darkening sky through the stained glass as I knelt in one of the back pews, and for a short time, I felt like Sophia wasn't so far away. Eventually, the priest there, Father Ignatius, would gently tell me that it was well past closing time, and I would leave, until one day he asked me to come with him. "I wonder if you'd consider joining the priesthood," he said. "Some widowers do." I laughed. "I'm barely Catholic," I said. "I just joined for her." He shook his head. "I don't believe you." The house at 1237 Palmer Avenue was decadent, even by LA standards. Set back on a nearly full-acre lot bordered by a tall stucco wall, the house soured up 3 stories, all elegant metal and glass. Later, we would learn that the girl's father had paid well over $1 million for the architect alone before construction ever started. As we approached, we noted that one bedroom where the light shone brown-red, though a darkened window. Reflexively, we both made the sign of the cross. Sitting on the front steps, we met Father Felipe, who was half asleep, slumped against the rail. Though he couldn't have been much older than 30, his skin appeared sallow, his eyes ringed like a cold, distant planet. His hand was wrapped in a thick bandage crusted with blood. "Father Anthony, Father Matthew." He reached out, his hands shaking, before breaking down in sobs. I could tell Father Anthony was unsettled at this greeting. "You have done your part now, Father Felipe," he said. "You should go back to your church. Pray. Rest." Father Felipe shook his head. "I won't leave until we've seen this through," he said. "I made a promise to myself." Father Anthony shook his head. "That's merely pride whispering in your ear," he said. "Please, go." Father Felipe reached down into his pocket and found a piece of candy. He popped it into his mouth. His breath was rank, and I wondered how long it had been since he last brushed his teeth. "I'll just wait a little longer," he said, "just until you've had a chance to go in." I could tell Father Anthony wasn't happy about this, but he was eager to go in and get to work. We brushed past Father Felipe, who fell back into a ball on the steps, and we walked to the door. Father Anthony rang the doorbell once, then waited patiently. After perhaps 15 seconds, he scowled and rang it again. "Mrs. Knowles," he called, but there was no response. Then finally he turned the knob and we entered. Immediately the stench hit us both. The house smelled as if the walls around us would burst, sending a flood of excrement down to cover our feet. Father Anthony raised a handkerchief to his nose, passing another to me so that I could do the same. Again, he called for Mrs. Knowles, but there was no response. Somewhere, up above, we heard a skittering sound, knocks on the wood, like someone on stilts running through the hall. Father Anthony fumbled in his pocket, removing his silver cross. He began to wave it ever so slightly back and forth, like a hypnotist's pendulum, as he recited a Hail Mary. "Mrs. Knowles?" I shouted, and the thumping sound stopped. "She's in the kitchen," said a voice that made my heart nearly stop. It was deep and resonant and seemed to speak from all around us. Father Anothony gestured for me to go to the kitchen. "You find the mother. I'll go up to talk to the girl," he said. He had removed the red velvet bag from his pocket and was loosening its drawstring. "Maybe we should call for assistance," I said, but he shook his head. "If we follow the rites, we will prevail. Remember, God is on our side. Go find the mother and get her out of the house. Hurry." Without another word, he headed up the stairs. I walked down the hall toward the kitchen, almost running. Then, as I reached the archway separating the rooms, I stopped and vomited, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. There in the kitchen lay Mrs. Knowles, or rather, what was left of her. In the center of the room lay a pile of bloody broken bones, all stacked in a messy pile, and topped with a broken skull matted in blonde hair. Most of her, the flesh, the organs, the brain and muscle, the fat, was all gone. Time may have passed. I can't be sure. My vision seemed to go black and then red. Strangely, I found myself oddly hungry, so much so that I nearly opened the refrigerator to look for something to eat. Then I heard a scream from upstairs, and my senses came back to me. I ran through the hall and up the staircase 2 steps at a time. It was clearly Father Anthony screaming, his cries mixed with the prayer to St. Michael. "Thy thousand hosts are spread, embattled o'er the azure sky, but Michael bears thy standard dread, and lifts the might cross on high." The prayer was punctuated with repeated shrieks, both from him and someone else. I ran down the hallway toward Maya's room, the rank smell growing so thick it seemed to thicken the very air. In the room I found them. They were coiled together like 2 pythons, both trying to strangle the other. Blood was everywhere, flowing freely from wounds on both of their bodies. Somehow, in the few minutes since we'd parted ways, Anthony had managed to lose both legs and his left arm, all bitten down to the nubs. Another long gash had opened his belly, and his guts were hanging out of him. With his one good arm, he was holding something gleaming up to Maya's face. Through the hazy air and the blood, it took me a few seconds to recognize it as a needle and silver thread. Somehow, he had managed to apply 3 or 4 stitches across the girl's mouth, sealing it almost shut. Now, even as he tried to apply a 4th stitch, she bit at his fingers with the side of her mouth, severing the pinky and chewing it with obvious joy. Father Michael cried out but continued the prayer. He, in that sign the rebel powers, did with their dragon prince expel, and hurled them from the heaven's high towers, down like a thunderbolt to hell. Every part of me wanted to run. If I'm being honest, I wanted to tear my collar and robes from my body and sprint into the LA night, never looking back. But something in me refused. Instead, I sprang forward, taking the shaking needle from Father Anthony's shaking fingers. "I did everything right," he said weakly, and then the light in his eyes went out. Maya turned her attention to me now, trying to bite me, shouting curses. "Run, run, run, little assistant, you're in over your head." I stared at the silver thread dangling from her mouth. I'd never even heard of such a thing. There were rules, protocols that I'd never even heard of, that I wasn't ready for. The girl smiled, pulling at the thread, beginning to unravel Father Anthony's careful work. I saw now that she would open her mouth wide and eat me down to the very bone, that I would scream while she chewed up my lungs and heart. Indeed, she was reaching for Anthony's guts now, slurping his intestines through the small holes still left on the side of her mouth. Except that I wasn't seeing any of that now. I was in a quiet room with Sophia, sitting side by side. On ours laps was a quilt. She was smiling, the light catching the strands of her light brown hair. "I can't do it," I was saying, fumbling with the needle. "Of course you can," she said. "It's not science. It's just in and out, in and out. We know you're good at that." I blushed, the needle slipping out from between my fingers. "Just relax," she said. "Here, let me guide you." She put her hand on mine, her flesh warm and soft. Slowly she guided my fingers down through the soft white fabric. Then suddenly, I was back. I watched my fingers slip the silver thread through Maya's lips. Only a crack at the side of her mouth remained exposed. "You're different than them," she said, her words more muffled now, and it almost sounded like a normal girl's voice. "You carry someone with you." "Who?" I used the moment of surprise to apply the final stitch, blood pooling around the thread as I cinched it shut, silencing her forever. As soon as it was done, she fell back in the bed, her eyes closing as sleep took her. After a while, after I'd gotten my thoughts together, I called Father Anthony's superior at the Vatican to explain what had happened. I tried to stay calm, to explain things as accurately as possible, but I'm sure my voice was shaking. Around me, the worst of the stench was gone, though ordinary one's blood, bile persisted. Still, the air was that much cleaner than before, and I found I was able to breathe. I expected him to doubt my story, but he just listened without saying anything. Then, finally, as I reached the end of what I had to say, he spoke. "You were able to apply the stitches yourself?" "Just the last couple. Father Anthony did most of the work." He paused for a moment. "Did you have any other outside help?" I thought about that for a second, about Sophia. "Maybe." "You did well," he said. "We will send people, for both you and the girl. They will bring you back here." "To the Vatican? Is that the protocol?" There was a brief pause. Father Anthony was a firm believer in protocol. "Are you?" "No," I said after a moment. "Good," he said. "Then we will have much to discuss when you arrive." For an hour, maybe two, after I called the Vatican, I sat on the front steps of the house, staring into space. Father Felipe was nowhere to be seen. I figured that was for the best. He'd probably taken Father Anthony's advice and run back to his church. With any luck, he was sleeping. I sat shaking on the steps. I reeked of blood and worse. Of course, I thought through the horror I'd just witnessed. The thick air, the smell of exposed guts, the glee on Maya's face as she slurped up Father Anthony's intestines. But that wasn't what dominated my thoughts. I'd seen her, Sophia, just as clearly as if she were still alive, warm and sitting beside me, teaching me to sew. Without question, she had been there. She had saved me. And so, I must have made an odd sight when the priests sent by the Vatican arrived. I sat there covered in several people's blood, including my own, my fingers bleeding from my clumsy needlework, smiling like I'd just seen God himself. "So good to find you well, Father Matthew," said a tall, muscular priest with a thick, grey beard. "I'm Father Thomas. This is my trainee, Father Anselmo." "Ah." He gestured to a rail-thin, bald man with angular features beside him. "I thought I knew all of the exorcists working in the States," I said, still half-dazed. He shook his head. "We are not ordinary exorcists," he explained. "We belong to a particular order, where discretion is of utmost importance. Still, we know rumors of our existence circulate. Perhaps you've heard of the Knights of St. Michael." I shook my head. "Good," he said. "We are only called upon in cases requiring certain non-traditional skills. Based on your call, the Vatican believes this may be one such case." Father Anselmo shot him a look, and I recognized it immediately. It was one I'd given Father Anthony a dozen times when we arrived at the home of some poor girl claiming to be possessed, but really just needed a few years of therapy, maybe some antipsychotic meds. What? I asked. You don't believe me, what I saw? We're certain you saw something, said Father Thomas. Whether you performed a common exorcism or encountered something greater remains in question. Look at my fucking clothes, I shouted, staggering to my feet. Look at the blood on my hands. Smell me. Don't you smell it? That's when I looked down at myself and realized I was clean. Not even a drop of blood decorated my robes. The only evidence of my encounter was a small scab on my index finger from where I'd pricked myself with the needle as I sewed Maya's mouth shut. I looked back at the house. Even the dark, smeared window was clean now, with a gentle light shining out. Without another word, I ran back up the steps and opened the door. Inside, the house was pristine, almost unnaturally so. The blood was gone, the stink too. Somewhere, a vanilla candle was burning. Gentle music played on the speakers overhead. The girl, I said to no one in particular. And now I was running up the stairs 2 at a time again. I ran down the hall and burst into her room, half expecting to find her hanging from the ceiling by her feet, a mass of skin and sinew hanging from her mouth. Instead, I found her lying still, almost death-like in bed. She wore a spotless white dress, and her hair fell about her head on the pillow, as if perfectly arranged strand by strand. She was beautiful now, no longer the creature of paper and bones I'd encountered hours earlier. The only evidence that anything had happened was the silver thread still in place, sealing her mouth shut. I heard the other priests approaching from behind me. None of this is right, I said. None of it was this way. I believe you, said Father Thomas, putting a hand on my shoulder. We have seen stranger things. The devil can be exceptionally tidy when he chooses to be. Or could it be that Father Matthew elected to perform a wholly unnecessary surgery, said Father Anselmo, gesturing to the girl's lips. We can pray that such is the case, for her sake, said Father Thomas. In the meantime, we will proceed as if this is a true lieutenant of hell, likely of the third circle. I gave him a look. There were no such things as circles of hell in the canon. Gluttony? Asked Father Anselmo, incredulous. I thought they were supposed to be fat. Father Thomas shook his head. Remember your Aquinas, he said. Gluttony takes 5 forms. Laute, too luxurious. Studios, too elaborate. Nemis, too large a quantity. Prepropera, eating at the wrong time. Ardenter, eating too fast. A glutton may be any size. I could tell Father Anselmo wanted to argue, but he was the trainee after all, and it wasn't becoming to argue, especially in front of a stranger. He bit his tongue. Very well then, said Father Thomas. Then we shall proceed. Prepare bindings of cloth soaked in holy water. Wrap her once at the shoulders, once at the wrists, once at the ankles. Father Matthew, if you are feeling up to the task, another set of hands would be useful, especially since time can be a factor in some cases. We will want to get her back to the Vatican as soon as possible before... As he spoke, I saw a hint of movement coming from the girl's direction. Glancing over, I saw something thick and black peek its head from between the 2 middle stitches of the mouth where the gap was greatest. It could have been a worm, a tongue, a snake, a centipede. Before I could get a good look, it pulled back inside. I helped Father Anselmo prepare the bindings, though I could tell he would have rather done the job himself. They'd brought holy water in some kind of red-brown earthenware jar that I hadn't seen before. We soaked 3 long strips of cloth and bound the girl, who didn't stir once. Though I had never heard of such a protocol before, the process made sense. 3 bindings representing the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, uniting to bind the demon. 2 hours later, we were on a private plane bound for Rome. The aircraft was luxurious by any standard, with plush white leather chairs emblazoned with the flaming sword of St. Michael in delicate black embroidery. 2 pilots sat up front, through a security door that looked extra thick. They'd made a point of letting me know they were both well armed. Of course, I wondered why such levels of protection were necessary, but I just nodded as if this was all perfectly normal. Enjoying the accommodations? Asked Father Anselmo. Father Thomas had drifted off at takeoff, snoring loudly. Maya lay nearby in a seat they'd reclined to dorm a bed. Father Anthony and I flew coach if we flew at all, I said. Usually we drove. He scoffed. I suppose you think yourself superior because of your humility. I never said any such thing, I said, but he was right. You didn't need to, he said with a sneer. He cracked his knuckles and then scratched furiously at the back of his head. You only reveal your own ignorance. We, the Knights of St. Michael, are the very sword of God. One does not enter the battlefield on bended knee. Supplicating to his opponent, he comes out in armor of gold, wielding a sword of fire, striking fear into the hearts of the demons. Now it was my turn to laugh. So the leather seats. That's the modern-day equivalent of a flaming sword. I'm sure they terrify the devil. Father Anselmo stood and stretched. He itched at his scalp again furiously. I read about you on the way over, he said. A convert, widowed. You wear the robes, but you're different than those of us who grew up in the faith, who never knew a woman's touch. Before, I'd been slightly annoyed at Father Anselmo. Now, at the mention of my wife, I felt my blood rising. God comes to us all at different times, I said quietly, but my hands were balled into fists. Save it for the flock, he said. We're all priests here. We should speak honestly. You and I, we're not the same. When my wife was in high school, she had a terrible boyfriend. He was an honor student and a top athlete, popular, beloved. No one would have suspected the pain he inflicted on her in private. Even when we started dating 10 years later, she couldn't describe what he'd done to her physically. In the dark of night, one summer alone in his family's cabin. No one for miles around, a fact he whispered to her over and over. All she would say is that a few days later, after praying the pain would go away on its own, that she'd driven herself to the doctor, who gave her stitches and promised not to tell her parents. Somehow, even after what he'd done, she couldn't break up with him. They continued dating through prom, even into the summer after senior year. She tried not to be alone with him, but it was futile. He hurt her again and again. When they finally broke up, there was no big confrontation. It was just the standard ending where they both went to college and drifted apart, eventually realizing they were no longer a couple. When they saw each other on holiday breaks, they acted friendly, even though his presence was enough to send her into a panic. After hearing the story, it occurred to me that I might have a moral obligation to find this man and hurt him as badly as he'd hurt her, maybe to kill him, partly to spare any future women he might date from a similar fate, but if I'm being honest, it was mostly pure revenge. Naturally, Sophia was utterly opposed. Maybe she wanted to protect me from the consequences of such a thing. More likely, she knew I wouldn't have a chance against him. He'd been an all-state wrestler and outweighed me by 20 pounds. Eventually, we came to a kind of agreement. I wouldn't seek the man out, but if I ever happened to bump into him, I was allowed to do whatever I wanted. For many years, whenever we visited her hometown, I felt a surge of adrenaline any time a man matching his description walked in the door of a restaurant. Is that him? I'd ask, and she'd shake her head no. Gradually, we visited Sophia's hometown less often. I never did see the man in person. As far as I know, I'd still have her permission to kill him if I ever bumped into him. You're right, I told Anselmo after a moment. We're not the same. And since we're going to be honest, maybe you'd be a better priest if you'd had a couple of rolls in the hay before you put on your collar, even just to know us sinners a little better. He was scratching harder than ever at the back of his head now. We're not the same, he was shouting now, so loud that Father Thomas began to stir in his seat. You didn't deserve to capture a lieutenant of hell. You got lucky. You weren't even properly trained. You just finished one last stitch. You're not even a real priest. He practically roared the last word. It had a strange echo, like it had been harmonized by two voices at once. As he spoke, he tore at the back of his skull again, and this time I heard a ripping sound, like flesh unzipping in two. Blood began to accumulate on his shoulders. Father Anselmo, said Father Thomas quietly, fully awake now. Please step to the side of the plane. Kneel. Fold your hands in prayer. I'll do no such thing, you meat-headed fuck, shouted Anselmo. It was clear that two voices were speaking in unison now, his and another deeper one emanating from the back of his skull. Suddenly, without warning, two things happened. Father Thomas began to say a Hail Mary in the original Latin, so fast that the words flowed together in a steady hum. Second, he pelted Father Anselmo with a jar of holy water that exploded as it collided with his chest, sending fragments of pottery and liquid everywhere. Behind me, he shouted between recitations. I stepped back. As I did, the plane shook, and I nearly fell. The sky had been cloudless when we took off from LA. Now, dark thunderheads had gathered outside, blotting out the sun and pelting the small windows with rain. Father Anselmo had taken a step back after absorbing the force of the water jar. He also turned 180 degrees, revealing his back to us. There, I saw a bloody face no bigger than a baby's skull protruding just above where his neck met his hairline. The baby's contorted mouth shouted every syllable as Father Anselmo screamed, "There's nowhere to run to. Priest, you're trapped up here with me now. This time, you're mine." "Bifrons the Two-Faced," said Father Thomas. "I thought I recognized your—" Before he could say another word, Father Anselmo Bifrons now charged at him. I realized that in addition to the tiny head, he'd sprouted an extra set of arms and legs, which extended from his elbows and knees, and had now grown almost as large as the original ones. The fresh limbs were bare and bloody, glossed with a sheen of mucus like a newborn baby. Bifrons fell on Father Thomas with his full weight, beating at him with the bloody limbs and biting at his face with his fast-growing new head. But Father Thomas had been prepared, pushing Anselmo to the side with one hand. He took a small silver blade in the other and stabbed it to the hilt into the baby head's right eye. The baby screamed a low growl that seemed to shake the very air inside the plane, and the aircraft dipped again, this time by 100 feet or more, tossing us all off our feet. When I looked back at Father Thomas, his forehead was bleeding from falling against the edge of a chair. Ignoring the injury, he dug into his bag and removed 3 more knives. "Demon of greed," he said, gesturing to the demon. "Bifrons, we can contain him if we seal all 4 eyes. Try to stay back. Let me work." Even as he said it, though, I could see him wobbling on his feet. He touched his forehead, and the blood was gushing now. "Bad luck, Father Thomas," said Bifrons. "I suspect our next little conversation will be in my place." He charged at Father Thomas again, but the priest was ready. Deftly, he stabbed 2 knives into the eyes that had once been Anselmo's. The demon howled in pain, so loud that my ears began to ring, and I fell to my knees. Outside, the clouds had fully blotted out the sun. Everything seemed to be shaking. I wondered if we were falling into the deep black sea. Thomas fell back now, his head thwapping the ground with an unpleasant crack. He didn't open his eyes. Across the plain, the demon rose, fixing me in its one remaining eye. The lights shorted in the plane, and the engines went silent. Everything was black, save for the occasional flash of lightning. It seemed to me that I was about to die, or that perhaps I already had. Perhaps the rest of my existence would be like this, surrounded by darkness with the constant feeling of falling, a demon laughing a few feet away. Of course, fear gnawed at me, like a family of mice nibbling at my guts. But could I be blamed? Wouldn't anyone be afraid in such a moment? "Bad luck for you both," said the thing. "At least you'll finally be able to visit your dear wife again. Sophia, isn't it? I hear she's been missing you greatly." At the mention of Sophia's name, reality snapped back to focus. It was as if the plane was holding in mid-air. Gravity felt somehow lighter. I got to my feet, my fear replaced with simple, blind rage. Suddenly, the thing in front of me wasn't Bifron, it was Sophia's ex. I reached forward and uncurled the final blade from Father Thomas's limp, bloody fingers. "I told you not to talk about my wife," I said. I could feel her there with me again. Silently, I asked if our deal was still on, if I could still kill him. I can't be sure, but I think I heard her whisper, "Yes." Now it was my turn to charge forward. My vision narrowed. Through the darkness, all I saw was the one cruel white eye staring at me. I thought of my wife. Then I drove the blade home. On the tarmac in Rome, a man with red robes was waiting for us. I recognized him from a pamphlet I'd once read as Cardinal Robles. He reacted little as he surveyed the bloody scene. The pilots still hadn't left the cockpit. I suspected it was some sort of protocol. Father Thomas lay in my lap, his head bound with a pillowcase I'd fashioned into a makeshift bandage. Both Maya and Anselmo's bodies lay peacefully on the floor, her mouth sealed with thread, his eyes with daggers. After a moment, the Cardinal began to laugh. "You'll have to forgive me, Father Matthew," he said. "It's not often that I send my men out to capture one demon, and they come back with 2. I coughed up a bit of blood. I wondered when I'd been injured. I didn't feel like laughing. "Enough," he said. "I think we'd better get these 2 back home before a 3rd one shows up. What do you say?" I nodded weakly. "We'll get these 2 to their new accommodations, and then we're going to have a nice long chat," said the Cardinal. "I'm starting to think that St. Michael has big plans for you." I squirmed uncomfortably in the ancient stool, its uneven padding forcing me to sit at a slant. In retrospect, I'm sure Cardinal Robles chose it on purpose. He wanted to see me as uncomfortable as possible, all part of the test. Of course, I was nervous already, As intended, the Grand Chapel's ceiling soaring above us made me feel small. 66 feet above us, God reached out to Adam, granting him life. The metaphor was obvious. I was Adam, waiting for my prize. But what was the cardinal about to give me? The old man fixed me in his gaze. "What do you know about hell?" he asked after a few moments. I thought back to my training. "Hell is the absence of God," I answered carefully. He smirked. "Good. Cautious answer. We like caution here, sometimes. Other times we prefer cojones." He started laughing, as if he'd just made some kind of outrageous joke. The cardinal had grown up on the streets of Montevideo in Uruguay. He had a reputation for crude jokes. Some people called him direct, others called him an asshole. I suppose he was both. "Let me rephrase," he said. "Suppose I were to ask you the geography of hell. Could you draw me a map? Could you describe its mountains, its swamps?" I shook my head. "I have never thought of it as a physical place," I answered, still careful. "Of course not," he said. "But you're not so stupid as to deny the connection between the physical and spiritual, correct? Take your little altercation in Los Angeles. You sewed the girl's lips shut, correct? But if that's all you did, there would have been no effect. You were able to quell the demon's hunger because the sewing of the mouth had a metaphorical, spiritual equivalent. Same with the demon's eyes on the plain. Think of Matthew 18:9. "And if thine eye causeth thee to stumble, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. It is good for thee to enter into life with one eye, rather than having two eyes to be cast into the hell of fire." Now I'm a bit lost, I confessed. The cardinal rubbed at his temples, clearly disappointed. "Let's try this one more time. Stop being so goddamn careful, or I'm sending you back to the States to study under Father David." I shuddered at the thought. Father David was a notorious coward, a priest only fit to deal with minor exorcisms. He had called the Vatican for assistance so many times on major ones that he'd earned the name Father Backup amongst his peers. "Those things you sealed, where do you think they live? Think back to Maya Knowles's house." I closed my eyes and thought back to the house where I'd sewn Maya Knowles's lips shut. I had spent every hour since then trying to block out the smell of blood and colon, the thickness of the air. Suddenly, I found I was speaking, almost without trying. "A swamp," I said, "thick mud, shit raining from the sky." The cardinal's eyes lit up. Yes, more. Someone always screaming, animal sounds. The air is freezing. There's a constant hail pelting the burning mud. "Yes," he shouted, and then he began to recite. In the third circle I arrive of showers. Ceaseless, accursed, heavy and cold, unchanged. Forever, both in kind and in degree. Large hail, discoloured water, sleety floor. Through the dun midnight air streamed down amain. Stank all the land whereon that tempest fell. I struggled to remember where he was quoting from. Certainly not the Bible this time. "Inferno," he said after a moment, looking disappointed. "You're not a literary man." "I studied engineering in college," I said. "More of a math brain. I do remember something about Dante being non-canonical." He rubbed his temples again. There was something exaggerated about his movements, like Donald Duck losing his cool in an old cartoon. "There are truths in this world that are better kept secret," he said. "The church must act as a shield sometimes, you know, guarding the flock from the fiery darts of the wicked. And so it is with us exorcists." I looked up at him, slightly confused. "I wasn't aware that you were an exorcist yourself. I mean, you're a cardinal." He started laughing. "There's a lot you don't know." He stood, stretching slightly. Then he began to lift the hem of his robe. I looked down to see a deep scar running from his ankle to his knee. "Got that one from a demon of violence named Toru. Everyone was sure I'd lose the leg below the knee. Doctors are idiots, of course." He raised the robe further and turned from me, exposing 4 parallel scars across his back. "Those are from Mammon himself, demon of greed. He got away from me, but not before he left me this little souvenir." He paused, looking up at the ceiling, up at God. "They're demons, you understand. They're different than the minor entities responsible for most possessions. Even what the church calls a major exorcism is really just the minor leagues compared to what we handle. These demons I'm talking about, they are the lords and lieutenants of hell, professional soldiers for the other side. More exorcists will never encounter one over the course of a whole career." "The thing that was inside Maya Knowles," I started to say, "was Lady of Hell, a demon of gluttony. quite powerful. Really, you shouldn't be here today. If things had gone according to the demon's plan, she would have eaten you too, and then consumed her own host body like an Ouroboros, breaking her own arms and legs and swallowing them whole. I was beginning to feel sick, and if I'm going to be honest, I was afraid. Everything I'd known about demons up to that point was suddenly invalid. I thought I'd been a soldier for the church, but now I realized I was playing parlor games with hell's second stringers. Were the things that had taken Maya and Anselmo the worst things out there? Or were there even worse horrors to be discovered? Why are you telling me all this? He smacked his head and muttered, Dios mio. Then he looked up at me. Isn't it obvious? He finally asked. I want to know if you want in. If you want to play in the major leagues, mijo. Do you want to fight some real demons with us? Or do you want to go back to sprinkling holy water on little shits pretending to be possessed so that they can get more attention from Mama? I thought of the demon slurping Father Anthony's guys through the tiny hole at the side of its mouth. I thought of the baby head sprouting from Father Anselmo's neck, its deep, guttural laugh. I thought of the foul air, the smell of shit. Cardinal Robles held up a hand. Don't answer yet, he said. It's enough to know you're considering it. Before your answer, you need to see the reality of what we're up against. He swept his arm out with a flourish. Follow me. Do you believe in God? Any kind of God? I looked up at Sophia. It was a bold question for a second date, but she was asking it anyway, even before I'd asked her out. I'd known Sophia was religious, not that she was a fanatic or anything, but she went to church most Sundays, which was unusual in our social group. I shrugged, hoping we could deal with the question quickly and move on to another topic. I think at some point I decided it was one of those big questions that you could never answer, so I stopped asking. I try to spend my time on problems that have solutions. She silently ate a few forkfuls of her salad. I'm assuming you do, I said, trying to break the awkward silence. Believe, I mean. Well, I don't believe in God, she said after a bit. Believe implies there'd be a possibility of doubt. I know there's a God, because I know there are demons. I've seen them at work. I topped off my wine and took a drink. This was getting interesting. What do you mean, seen them? This is going to sound crazy, so I'll understand if you get up from the table after a bit and walk out on me. I won't be offended at all. We can still be friends after. I met her eyes. They were deadly serious. I'm not going to do that, I said. You can tell me. Now it was her turn to take a long drink. When I was younger, 4th grade, I was possessed for a few months, she said. I almost spit out my wine. I know how it sounds, she continued. I used to be embarrassed to tell people, but it's part of who I am. There was a demon living inside me. It pushed me to a dark little bubble that I didn't know existed. It was terrifying, watching her through a black haze, saying the most vile things to my parents, my sister. I'd always been a good kid. At least that's what I thought. But I must have let her in somehow. She was crying now. For a second, I wondered if I was on a date with an insane person, but when I looked at her, she didn't seem even the least bit crazy. I reached out and took her hand. I'm so sorry, I said. It's okay, she said. The church, they sent people. Exorcists. It turned out to be something minor, they said. It didn't feel minor to me, but their prayers made it go away. I'm sorry, I said again. What else could I say? Don't be, she said. It was a gift. After that, I didn't have to believe anymore. I knew there was something out there, a bad thing, and a good thing. I've gotten to carry that with me every day of my life. I followed Cardinal Robles through a series of rooms and doors, each less grand than the last. Gone were the frescoes and magnificent tapestries. Instead, we weaved through corridors of simple brick. I realized that the architecture too was growing simpler, older. The brickwork was uneven, caked with centuries of grime. The air began to grow cold. Without realizing it, I recognized that we'd been walking slowly downward. There were no windows here or even electric light, just large candles inset into the walls. Of course, everyone knows about the grandeur of the current apostolic palace, but like many things in life, truths lurk beneath the surface that most people never realize. Some of these bricks you're seeing now go all the way back to the 4th century. This was all part of the old St. Peter's Basilica, constructed by Constantine I. He was a convert like you know. The path we followed was winding and haphazard. Without the cardinal there, I wondered if I'd be able to retrace my steps and escape. Escape. That word started to echo in my mind. I realized I didn't like it here. I hated it, wanted to get out at any cost. Back to the light. The murals, God and Adam. Then, something shifted in me. Somewhere not too far away, I felt her presence. It was unmistakably Sophia, as if she'd just walked behind me in the hall. I turned, sure I'd seen her, but she was gone. It was enough to make me keep walking forward. Finally, we came to a door. "Beyond this door is no return," said the Carandal after a few moments. "Even if you choose not to join us, you will have seen things beyond your imagining, beyond the worst descriptions of Dante or even Revelation." For a moment I only stared at the door handle. It looked ornate and ancient, filthy from the grime of 1,000 hands of 1,000 priests. Beyond it, I heard something that sounded like the clanking of metal on metal. "Go ahead," said the Cardinal. "Open it." I took a step back in revulsion, but when I looked again, I saw now a handle, but a woman's hand, soft and welcoming. I knew who it belonged to, saw the familiar wedding band on the ring finger. I knew somehow that if I went forward, I was moving closer to her. I walked forward and opened the door. We entered a room built of ancient stones. It was perhaps as large as a high school gymnasium, but perfectly round, with many doors extending in all directions. To one side sat a man in priest's robes and a thick leather apron. Nearby, a cauldron of molten silver sat over a roaring fire. As I watched, the priest said a blessing over the silver, then poured it into a large cross-shaped mold. Soon, he was pounding on the surface. Beside him, in neat stacks, lay perhaps 100 such crosses, all neatly stacked. "Why so many?" I asked the Cardinal, who only smirked. "You'll soon see." He gestured to the blacksmith, who set aside his hammer for a moment. "Where are the new prisoners? Or just the girl, actually?" asked the Cardinal, and the man gestured silently to one of the doors, adorned with gold inlay and flanked by small silver gargoyles. The man resumed his work as we walked to the door and opened it. On the other side, I found out what the crosses were for. In the center of a small, dimly lit room lay a cage, more of a box, really, a 6-foot cube. The whole thing had been built of silver cross, all elaborately connected to form an inescapable grid. Inside lay Maya Knowles. Her eyes were no longer closed, but the stitching still ran across her lips. Both of her wrists were manacled in braces connected on opposite sides of the cage by silver chains. I gave the Cardinal a curious look. "This is like no exorcism I've ever seen," I said. He shook his head. "You misunderstand, Father," he said. "This is no longer an exorcism. Maya and whoever has infested her will be here as our permanent guests, unable to cause further mischief in the world." I felt something twist in my stomach. "You have to let her go," I said quietly. "I can get the thing out of her. Together we—" The Cardinal shook his head. "You could kill her," he said. "Release her that way. But there is no saving Maya Knowles' mortal life, which is why she'll be our guest here for as long as she lives. For as long as the demon is trapped within Maya's mortal coil, it will be unable to hurt another soul." "You can't," I said. "Maya, she's still in there. She's an innocent." "Were she truly innocent, the demon would have never infested her," said the Cardinal. "Please understand, I know this is a lot to swallow. This is why we work in the basement, out of the light. What we do here takes moral courage. The same bravery that Abraham possessed when he stood over Isaac, dagger in hand. Thanks to Maya's sacrifice, dozens of others, possibly hundreds, will be spared a similar fate. She is the true cage, the box of silver crosses that just keeps her in place." As he spoke, Maya looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "It's her," I said. "Right now it's her, not the demon. It let her to the surface. She's experiencing all of this." "Of course," said the Cardinal. "The demon loves to hide inside. It loves to let her suffer." "Maya can't eat like that," I said. "Can't drink. She won't live long." The Cardinal shook his head. "You still don't understand the powers we're facing. With demons of this strength, these lieutenants of hell, the possessed body is essentially immortal. It has no need for sustenance. Maya will still be here long after you and I are both dust." I wanted to fall to my knees and vomit. The Cardinal was staring at me hard, trying to read my reaction. "Do you need a drink?" he asked. "Water? Wine?" I found I could barely speak. He shook his head, looking disappointed. "Do what you must," he whispered. "I never claimed it was easy to be a soldier on the front lines." I ignored him and took a step toward Maya. Then, suddenly, something compelled me to run to her. I felt around the cage of silver crosses, searching for a hinge that would open or a weak spot in the soldering. "Step away!" shouted Cardinal Robles. He was keeping his distance from both of us. "You still don't know what you're dealing with, and those restraints aren't built to be permanent." Before he'd even finished his sentence, I heard a horrible cracking sound, and I looked over to see Myers wrenching her arm against one of the braces. The arm had clearly broken, and now blood was gushing freely from the places where her bone had pierced her flesh. Quickly, she pulled the broken limb from the bracer and swung her limp forearm in my direction, spraying me with blood. The blood splattered across my face, running down my lips and into my mouth, and I was struck by the sensation that I'd ingested poison. "Drink up, priest," the thing inside her shouted before breaking into peals of laughter. I looked around the room, looking for some kind of weapon. I was filled suddenly with a bloodlust like I'd never known. "Step back," shouted Cardinal Robles again. This time he grabbed my collar and pulled hard. He was far stronger than he looked, and I found myself clattering against the ground. He rubbed at the bridge of his nose, frustrated. The demon was laughing now at me, I realized. "This is your new soldier, Robles," it asked. "He'll be dead before the week is out." As she spoke, blood continued to pour from her open wound. Seeing my eyes fixed on it, she tried to swing it at me again, but this time I was too far away for the blood to hit me. My stomach turned. If I'm going to be honest, I almost pissed myself. In that moment, I realized I couldn't be in the room another second. My instincts took over. I had to leave. The demon cackled as the fear took over, and I ran. "Go if you like," called Cardinal Robles, "but you can't run from the devil." I was more terrified than I'd ever been in my life, if I'm being honest. Not just of the thing in Maya, but of the cardinal outside the cage, of the whole new reality I'd stumbled into. I ran back to the room with dozens of doors to find the blacksmith back at his work, smoothing out another silver cross. I tried to remember which door I'd come from in the first place, but they all looked basically the same. I walked the circle, fruitlessly searching for some identifying mark, but came up empty. Finally, I just opened one. On the other side was a dark tunnel leading downward. A waft of sulfur hit my nostrils, blowing on a hot wind. I was immediately struck by the certainty that I'd opened a doorway to hell itself. I was about to close it when I heard a voice calling for me. "Matthew," it said. "Is that you? I've been waiting for so long, calling to you, trying to bring you here." I could barely speak. My throat went dry, my vision blurred. Somehow, I still managed to speak her name. "Sophia." "Matthew." I heard Sophia's voice even more distinctly this time. I was sprinting toward her now as she called my name again and again. The wind in the hallway grew warm, then disappeared, then blew again, even hotter, as if some great beast was breathing in the distance. Finally, the hallway ended, terminating in a large chamber built of ancient bricks, all coated in a sheen of wet. Were the rocks themselves sweating? Numerous grates lined the stone floor, the hot air wafting up from them and heating my feet through my shoes. In the center of the room, in a cage of silver crosses tarnished from years of neglect, sat Sophia. "Matthew," she asked, "is it really you?" She looked beautiful, better than I remembered. She wore a red silk robe that did nothing to hide her form, and I couldn't help watching the way it fell over her body. She certainly looked better than she'd looked on the slab at the morgue the last time I'd seen her, her face bloodied from slamming against the steering wheel, her neck bent at an impossible angle. I knew what I was seeing was impossible, and yet for a brief moment, just a second, I wanted it so badly to be true that I let myself believe it was. "Come to me, my love," she said. "There must be some way for you to get me out of here." I found myself looking around for a rock, a crowbar, some forgotten piece of metal I would use to smash her cage to pieces. As I looked, we both heard footsteps, fast approaching down the hall. "Never mind that," she said. "Just come closer. Kiss me through the cage. Let me taste your lips just one more time." I hesitated now. There was something different about her skin. It was rippling a bit with a silver sheen. My desire began to mix with fear. I imagined pressing my lips through a hole in the cage, only for her to bite them off. I imagined the blood running down my face as she cackled, my flesh dangling from her lips. "Now," she said, and her voice was lower than before. I lifted my right foot from its place on the ground, preparing to step toward her. As I did, she shrugged off the silk dress, revealing her naked body. I felt myself harden in a way I hadn't in years, since she'd died, and I'd given myself to God. Careful not to touch the silver cage, she moved closer to me, just barely not touching the metal. "Come," she said. I lowered my foot to the ground. "The scar," I said after a moment. "The burn on your shoulder. It's not there anymore." "I'm whole now," she said. "I'm perfect." "You're not her," I said, tears pouring down my face, and as I spoke the words, her skin began to shimmer silver, and I saw her for what she was. A woman wrapped head to toe in roughly made sacks. The bags were made of coarse cloth with silver threaded through, and bound tightly at the neck, wrists and ankles with thicker silver rope. Before I could speak another word, she lunged forward, lurching against the side of the cage. There was a sizzling sound from where she threw her shoulder against the metal, and she screamed in pain, her voice more like a chorus than a single woman's howl. I staggered back and fell on the slick, wet ground. "You see it then for what it is?" asked Cardinal Robles, approaching from behind me. I nodded. "She has had many names, but she's known mostly as Abizu," said Cardinal Robles. "You can call me Abby if you like," said the thing in the cage. She had retreated to the center now, away from the lattice of silver crosses. "Since we're so close and all, we were just about to have a little moment, weren't we, Matty?" "You don't know a thing about me," I said, but she started laughing. Then she held up her hand, which was bound inside the cloth bag. She pulled at it with her opposite hand, revealing the outline of a missing finger. "They didn't get all of me in here," she said. "There was a piece I'd left out in the world. Ask them where I left it, Matty. Ask them where it was. How do you think I've been calling to you all this time? How do you think I know you so well?" I looked over at Cardinal Robles, who slowly nodded. "There's much to explain, but not here." He looked agitated. Walking over to a small hole in the wall, he shouted down, his voice echoing, "Tell someone that the fucking holy water needs a fresh blessing." Then he smiled again and turned back to me. "Natural hot springs," he said, gesturing to the vents. "You bless the water, and voila. Keeps them nice and docile most of the time. Now come on, before she tries to dress up like your high school crush and gets you worked up all over again." Slowly, I backed away, following the Cardinal out of the room. The whole time, the demon's eyes didn't leave me. Beneath the bag covering her head, I saw her tongue poking out, forming a small wet spot. "See you again soon," she said. "Sooner than you think." And when she said the words, I believed her, and I was terrified, because for the first time, I truly believed a demon had seen my soul and known the weak places in it, because I knew I was imperfect. Abizu called after us as we ascended through the dreary maze. At first it was my name, over and over again. Then it became more of a guttural moan, some sort of cross between pleasure and pain. Even knowing what she was, it took everything in me not to turn back and run to her. "You're trembling, Father Matthew," said Cardinal Robles, "but is it your body or your faith that's shaking?" "I'll be fine," I said, still unable to control the palsy. I was still trying to digest everything the demon had said. "Is it true," I finally asked, "that she left a piece of herself somewhere? What did she mean?" "Search your heart," he said. About a year into our marriage, I woke to find Sophia missing from bed. I got up and walked down the hall. The house was utterly silent. Then, beneath the silence, I heard a sharp intake of breath, the sound you make when you're doing everything in your power not to cry out. Coming down the stairs, I saw a light on in Sophia's sewing room. I heard the sound again, and I called Sophia's name, but there was no response. Finally, I came to the doorway of the room and looked inside. There sat my wife, a half-finished quilt on her lap. I recognized it as one she'd been working on earlier that day, a blue and white pattern inspired by old Dutch Delftware, except now, a deep red had soaked through. "Sophia?" I asked, but she didn't respond. She was doing something with her left hand, picking at it maybe, pressing something. I took a step forward. She inhaled, gritting her teeth, trying not to scream. Then I saw the needle. It was a large one, perhaps 4 or 5 inches long. She had inserted the pointed end into the palm of her hand and was pressing on it now, pushing it deeper and deeper into the skin. As I watched, she pushed with all of her strength, and the needle made a tent of the flesh on the opposite side of her hand before finally piercing through, the blood blooming red around it. She sighed in relief now, tears coming to her eyes. "Sophia!" I screamed, running to her, and something seemed to flash on in her eyes. "What are you doing?" I got 3 stitches wrong, she said quietly. 3 in a row. I had to punish myself. We need to call a doctor, I said. She was crying now. There's something wrong inside me, she said. Something it left behind. It won't come out. It's been there so long it's all tangled up. It's a part of me now forever and ever. I was still looking at the needle, trying to decide if I should pull it out or wrap it in cloth before I called 911. They thought they got it out, but they didn't, she said. Not all of it. I was nearly hyperventilating as we continued our ascent. The memory of the needle had flooded through my mind all at once. Of course, Sophia had many such episodes. It wasn't exactly that I'd forgotten them, but they were compartmentalized, kept separate from the Sophia I wanted to remember. At the same time, I was well aware that Sophia had been possessed once, and that it had left its scars on her forever after. If I'm being honest, half the reason I joined the clergy was to exact some measure of revenge on the demons that had hurt her. Wait, I said, so you're saying that demon, that was the one who... Abizu possessed your wife when she was a young girl, said the cardinal. We sent 2 of our best exorcists. At first, the demon fought to stay in. Then, just before they could perform the ritual of binding, the demon escaped back to hell. Apparently, she left a bit of herself behind inside your wife. He wiggled a pinky in explanation. I thought of the thing in the cage, the missing finger under the cloth bag. After that, Abizu possessed another girl in South Korea, he went on, then a young mother in Australia, a grandmother in Spain. She would use their flesh to fulfill certain desires before discarding the bodies. She moved quickly. In each of those cases, we couldn't catch her fast enough. Our priests arrived to find corpses. Finally, she grew bold and tried to possess a nun in Milan. That time, I went personally and bound her before the demon could escape. Now Abizu remains in the nun's body, caged up as you saw her. She won't hurt another soul. As he spoke the last words, he opened a door, and we entered a light-filled room where the air no longer smelled of sweat. For the first time in hours, I felt I could breathe. Now you understand, I hope, the need for what we do, he said. I nodded weakly. The question is, he said, now that you know everything, do you want to join us? I nodded again, but with more confidence this time. I want to catch as many of these bastards as we can, I said. I want to fill this dungeon. The worst part about insomnia is the boredom. Nothing open except for the seedy places. Nobody awake except for the seedy people. Nothing to do except watch movies and eat sunflower seeds. Seriously, fuck insomnia. My sleep capacity generally comes and goes in waves, but the few weeks before I found Hal's were especially rough. There was no inciting incident, just that general feeling of restlessness and anxiety that has become a familiar friend over the years. I tried all of the standard assists, warm milk, old movies, cut down on my caffeine intake, all the usual things that people recommend but never work. Eventually, more out of boredom than anything else, I took to taking late-night walks through the city. I worked a shitty job as a projectionist at a local movie theater, and on the weekends I didn't often get off work until the last movie finished, and the city had long since wound down by the time I was free. The first week or 2 I stayed towards the well-lit areas populated by the intoxicated, both rich and poor. But while the people watching was always good, I quickly grew tired of the relentless noise and began wandering off the beaten path. I'm not sure how I'd never noticed Hal's before. I distinctly remembered buying smokes at the dilapidated gas station across the street on several occasions, and I'm sure my eyes would have been drawn to the large storefront windows, still brightly lit and welcoming at 3 a.m. The neon sign pronouncing it Hal's low-cost thrift and consignment glowed in garishly conflicting colors, except for the first S, which was burnt out. Of course, I would come to realize that there were very good reasons I had never seen it before, but that first night I wondered if maybe I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. I entered, of course, even if I didn't feel the need to validate that the whole thing wasn't just a figment of my imagination. There was no way I was denying my curiosity. It was probably the smell that I noticed first, kind of a combination of burning sage and rancid meat, but in a weirdly good kind of way. Best thing I can compare it to is a beach bonfire at low tide. The place was packed full of merchandise, all displayed very neatly on row after row of shelving, but without any sign of clear organization. Knickknacks sat on the same shelves as old magazines and jumper cables. A bizarre collection of artwork decorated the walls, from shadow boxes holding sports paraphernalia to Pink Floyd posters to copies of famous Impressionist paintings. The wall furthest from the front entrance was actually just an unbroken line of doors. Each door was crafted in an entirely different style, and each painted a different color to create a full-length pride flag along the wall. In the center, the green door actually appeared to be an elevator, which really just raised additional questions. I began to browse the first aisle to the left of the front door. A full silver-plated dining set, a clown costume, a chainsaw without a chain, 4 cookbooks, a Super Soaker XP100 already filled with water, several fake antique-looking religious relics such as crosses and Buddha heads, and a full-length evening cloak that made me immediately start contemplating a career as a supervillain, if for no other reason than I would look amazing in it. I browsed several more aisles with a bemused smile on my face as the truly eclectic inventory continued to defy any clear organizational sense, until a gruff voice cleared its throat. I glanced up to see the shopkeeper behind the front counter staring at me. He was a medium-sized man, but held a clear "don't fuck with me" aura around him. His head was shaved bald, and his arms and shoulders indicated someone who had spent more than a few years working in trades. "Can I help you find something?" he asked, his voice a low grumble that ran the line between professionalism and wanting to throw your ass to the curb. I shot him one of my patented disarming smiles. "Not really, I'm just browsing." He continued to stare for a moment, his eyes probing as if searching for a way to sort me into one of the Jungian archetypes that all retail employees have for their customers. "Incubus?" he asked, finally. "Excuse me? Are you an incubus?" he responded, his eyes still searching mine. "No, Gemini, actually. Well, on the cusp with Cancer, really. I didn't think people actually use the astrology pickup in real life. I gotta ask, do you get a lot of success with that one? With nostalgia being all the rage these days, going for one of the classic pickup lines is actually a brilliant idea." The corner of the man's mouth twitched just for a moment before returning to its painted-on scowl. That immediately put me at ease. Couldn't work the late-night shift without having that hard shell of an exterior, but if I could touch a sense of humor, he probably wouldn't be throwing me out anytime soon. "I don't get a lot of people coming in here just to browse," he said, his voice having moved slightly away from the gravelly grumble he was using before. Less Bob Dylan, more Bob's Burgers. Most know exactly what they want by the time they lay eyes on this place. I shrugged. What can I say? I'm an impulsive sort. "Hey, how much is this?" I lifted up a snow globe that held what looked like a large hospital. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow. "Good eye, that's 200. I whistled, immediately placing it carefully back on the rack. Pricey for a paperweight. Collector's item. There are a lot of stories inside that little snow globe. You could probably get a couple thousand from the right buyer if you're fine dealing with that kind of person. I take it since you're selling it for $200, you're not fine with that?" The corner of the shopkeeper's mouth twitched again. I could tell he was warming to me. "I'm pretty sure you're not here for that old thing anyways." "What am I here for then?" "I'm not sure yet. Keep browsing, I'm sure you'll find it." I did as I was told. An antique set of writing quills, what looked like a defunct Tesla coil, a compass and a sextant, a typewriter, a VCR, a few old board games I had never heard of, and a few other raggedy children's toys, including an actual Raggedy Ann doll. Nothing really struck my fancy until I was flipping through a rack of clothing and came across a treasure. I delightedly snatched it up and approached the front counter, placing it in front of the shopkeeper. He raised another eyebrow at me, and I beamed a smile at him in return. "I've always wanted one of these," I chortled. The shopkeep shook his head and pressed a few buttons on the archaic register. "Not Faye, then. Never met a Faye with a decent sense of humor. For the white t-shirt with 'I'm with stupid' written on it, that'll be $1.53. I fished a handful of coins out of my pocket and counted out exact change. He took it and sorted the money into the correct slots. He looked back up at me and shook his head. "This has got to be the dumbest sale I've made this year. I'm not even sure why that was on the rack." "Hey, I'm not complaining," I said, pulling the new purchase over the shirt I was already wearing. "Did you just open? I walk by this area pretty often, and I'm sure I've never seen you here before." The man's smile came out fully into the open. "Yes and no. We've been in business for a long time, but I guess you could say we're new to the area." "Well, I hope you stick around for a while, Hal," I said. nodding with feigned understanding as I extended my hand. "You've got a bunch of weird shit in here, and there aren't many other places for me to go shopping at this time of night." "Butch," the shopkeeper replied, shaking my outstretched hand. "Excuse me?" "My name's Butch, not Hal. What the hell would the owner be doing working the front counter at 3 a.m? I threw my head back and laughed. "I stand corrected." Butch grinned. "So not an incubus, not a fae, not a vamp. What the hell are you doing in my shop?" I raised an eyebrow. "Buying vintage clothing, apparently." "No, seriously, what's your deal? Shapeshifter, Wendigo, cannibal?" "Dude, I've worked enough retail to know all about the normal customer archetypes, but I think you've lost me on these. Is a shapeshifter one of those shoplifters who keeps showing up in different clothes like they're actually fooling anyone?" Butch looked at me in perplexity, but a little bell rang announcing the arrival of another customer before he could continue his line of questioning. We both glanced towards the door instinctually, and I suddenly also began wondering what the hell I was doing in this store. The woman who had just entered was tall, disturbingly tall. At least that was my first impression. I soon realized, though, that she wasn't actually tall. She was just floating a solid 2 feet off the ground. She wore a long, pale white and semi-transparent dress that fell clearly past her feet and dragged gently on the floor. A white veil was pinned to her unkempt mane of dark hair and spread across her face. That veil did nothing to disguise the bloodshot and sorrowful eyes, the broken nose, nor the mouth that hung open to the center of her chest, leaving a large black void from her cracked and broken top teeth to well past her neck. I recoiled in horror, slipping and falling directly onto my ass before scooting myself back until my back hit a rack of shelves and a hairy, taxidermied hand fell onto my lap. I held it up in preparation to do battle should I need to. The spectre, however, paid me absolutely no mind. She merely glided down one of the aisles, raised her hand to delicately select something off a shelf, and then floated back up to Butch's counter. "Evening, Maeve. Just the usual?" Butch asked casually. The woman's cavernous mouth seemed to open wider, and a reverberating moan began to vibrate my soul. It wasn't loud, but it suddenly reminded me of the sound I heard my mother make over my grandfather's deathbed when I was 9 years old. "All right, gorgeous, it's 4:50. The woman in white reached out a hand limply and dropped a handful of crumpled bills on the counter. She then turned and slowly glided out of the door. My shaking hands continued to point the furry limb at her long past the point she was out of sight. "Throat lozenges," stated Butch. I swept the leg to point at him, my heart still racing and my eyes wide. Butch seemed unconcerned. "Maeve comes in every night for a pack. Her work leaves her throat pretty sore. I'm not sure if they do much good, but it's always the regulars who keep a business afloat." "That was a fucking banshee!" I almost screamed. Butch's eyebrows raised as though impressed. "Wow," he said. "I'm impressed. Most humans wouldn't recognize one on sight. Hey, could you stop pointing that thing at me? They can get a little unpredictable if you're not used to them." I kept my impromptu weapon trained on him for another moment before allowing my hand, still tightly clenched, to fall into my lap. I continued to breathe shakily for another moment and tried to get my head straight. "I'm sorry," I said once I felt like I could speak without screaming. "That was really not something I expected to see tonight. What the fuck, Butch? Banshees are fucking real, and they come in here every night for pharyngitis treatment. What the fuck is this place?" I realized my voice was starting to gain volume again. I stopped, swallowed, and took another raspy breath. "Sorry," I said again. "I've never reacted well when I get really scared. Believe me, I wish that didn't happen to me, but..." The thing still clasped in my hand suddenly lurched. I curiously glanced down at it, only just then fully noticing what I had been clenching in my fist. "Fuck, this is a monkey's paw, isn't it?" "Yeah, you may want to put that down before you make another wish," said Butch, an amused smile on his face. "Why, what did I say? Still scared?" "Of what? Oh, right, ugly banshee chick. Nah, I'm good now. Why do my pants smell bad?" Butch rolled his eyes. "Go ahead and grab a new pair, no charge." "Nice. Can I use your bathroom?" He nodded towards the far wall of the shop. "Purple door. I'd avoid opening any others if I were you." "Spoil sport, is that elevator real?" "Yep. And no, I'm not answering any follow-up questions until I can't smell you anymore." 10 minutes later, I was feeling much cleaner, if slightly chilly, in my newly bought I'm with stupid t-shirt and newly gifted cum-slut booty shorts. I must have been starting to grow on Butch, because other than another twitch of his mouth and slight shake of his head, He didn't much react to my change in style. "So you're actually just straight human, aren't you?" he asked ruefully. "I can't think of another species that would so flagrantly disregard their own self-respect." "Never seen the video of the otter raping a decapitated fish head, have you? You know what I mean. Even the blood orgy folk will still show up in something tailored at least." "Butch, you just had a floating girl in here wearing funeral clothes." "Versace. Maeve's taste is old-fashioned, but always quality." I paused with my mouth open before shutting it slowly. "All right then. I guess I stand corrected. Should I change so I don't offend the blood orgy folk?" I finally got a full laugh from Butch. "What's your name, kid?" "Clear." "Sorry?" "Clear. Middle name is Water. My parents were hippies, also big fans of revivals." "Man, thought I drew the short straw when it came to names, but you've got me beat. So what?" The shop bell rang again. Unlike with the previous customer, I felt not even the slightest twinge of fear as the latest monster strolled casually into the building. 6.5 feet tall and covered in reddish-brown fur, the man with the overtly canine face was sporting a cordial grin. The werewolf nodded casually at Butch and began strolling the aisles. Butch nodded back and then raised an eyebrow at me as though interested in my newfound stoicism. "Well?" he asked, as if unsure whether or not I was going to shit myself again. "I can't believe you gave me a hard time about my booty shorts and then didn't blink at that guy dropping werewolf dong." Butch grunted in satisfaction. "Guess that monkey's paw was the real deal. I should bump up the price." "You didn't know?" He shook his head. "It's good policy not to fuck around with a monkey's paw. Had a feeling it was legit, though. A lot of the other stuff we got from that particular estate ended up being pretty extraordinary." There was a pause. "Such as?" I demanded. "Come on, dude. You can't drop that line and then not show off a bit." Butch laughed again and turned around to the display wall behind the counter. He pulled down a shadow box and laid it on the counter in front of me. Inside was an almost cartoonishly large revolver. 6-chamber, but with a bulbous barrel that could have fired a skee-ball. There were 3 huge rounds already loaded, but with no caliber that I recognized. "You seem like the kind of guy who would appreciate this." He opened the case and gestured for me to pick it up. I did, immediately surprised by its apparent weightlessness. I spun it around my finger, gunslinger style, and leveled it harmlessly towards the doors at the end of the hall. The werewolf glanced up at me curiously for a moment before returning to his shopping. "Love the way it handles, but I don't recognize the make." "One of a kind," Butch said. "They call it the Chekhov gun." I laughed. "Seriously? Guess I have to fire it then, huh?" "Probably, but I wouldn't waste the ammo if you don't have to. Those 3 rounds are all there are left." "How very hackneyed," I said, examining one of the rounds. "These things seem a bit unnecessary, unless you're hunting kaiju. What are they?" "I've just taken to calling them MacGuffins. I've only seen it used once during a debate over the bathroom being only for paying customers. One thing led to another, and a full army of vampires ended up laying siege to the shop. Had to have been at least 400 or 500 of them. Hal shot off a round from this, and it fired an actual sun. Gave me second-degree burns on every exposed inch of skin, but it fried every last one of those fuckers." "Wait, it shoots a sun?" I asked incredulously, cautiously setting the gun back on the counter. "No, it shoots whatever it has to get the job done," Butch explained. "That makes no sense whatsoever. You do realize there's a werewolf browsing through old Megadeth CDs 10 feet behind you, right?" I turned around and locked eyes with the large, hairy fellow for a moment. His tongue lolled out of the side of his mouth in a wolfish smile, and he winked at me. "I mean, I get what you're saying, but I still think there's a big difference between ancient legends and a relatively modern literary construct." Butch opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment the door slammed open with enough force to cause the lights to flicker. I glanced over my shoulder at the darkened doorway, noticing Butch's hand move to rest lightly on the Chekhov gun on the counter. The werewolf's hackles raised as a low growl began to rumble from his direction. The man in the doorway seemed human enough, if high-stakes lawyers could be considered human, that is. He was tall, but not intimidatingly so. His suit was well-tailored, his hair immaculate. The charming smile on his face belied the cold contempt in his eyes. "Hey, Butch," he said, his voice a purring baritone. "Hey, Az, long time no see," Butch replied, his face devoid of emotion. "Way too long." The man pulled a coin from his pocket and began rolling it back and forth across his fingers. "Is your boss around?" "You know I haven't seen Hal in months, Az. Not since that incident with the Purgatory delegation. Paychecks are still rolling in, though. So he's out there somewhere. If you find him, let him know I'm taking the fender for a Christmas bonus. Az shook his head in feigned disappointment. It really would be in your best interest to help me track him down, Butch. You know the deal he made to run this place expired at the end of last month. Now my employer has a lot of respect for the old man and everything he's done over the years, so he's more than willing to renegotiate the terms. Butch shook his head. You're not hearing me, Az. I don't know where the guy is, and I don't have any way of getting a hold of him. Come on, you really mean to tell me your boss can't suss out where he is? I'm starting to get why his little rebellion failed. Still not sure how he duped all you idiots into following his lead, though. Was that like a Trump thing? Az's eyes narrowed. That's low even for you, Butch. I laughed involuntarily. I don't know, man, if the MAGA hat fits. Suddenly a force slammed into me, hurling me over the counter and against the wall behind the register. Shock shuddered through my body as a display hook pierced my shoulder. A flood of moisture spread down my back, and I immediately started feeling a little woozy, also a lot pissed. I jerked my head up to glare at Az. Motherfucker, I just bought this shirt. I felt myself reverse direction, flying off the wall and across the store. I flailed painfully as I soared, managing to tip over one of the racks before colliding with the werewolf. I couldn't help but marvel at how soft he was as we hit the floor and slid into another rack, bringing its contents down on us. I always envisioned werewolf fur as being more coarse, I thought, as I waited out the falling inventory. Sorry, Jack, I muttered, rolling away from the werewolf and painfully climbing to my feet. Cool if I call you Jack. Never caught your actual name. Jack growled, shaking his head like a wet dog. I don't know why you have to make me hurt your friends before you tell me what I want to know, Butch. You know how much it pains me to hurt innocent bystanders. Butch was levitating over the cash register, his limbs shaking violently as he appeared to reflexively attempt to swallow his own tongue. I started grabbing anything within reach and throwing it at Az. I managed to score a direct hit with a tea kettle and an old computer mouse, but it was the lawn dart directly to the head that finally got his attention. Butch took in a raspy breath and fell to the ground as Az's head spun around to glare at me. His hand shot up and I felt my windpipe close. My hands instinctively went to my neck as I tried desperately to take in air. Idiot child, rasped Az, his eyes appearing a dull red as the edges of my vision began to darken. Do you have any idea who you're... I lost the rest of his sentence as Jack launched himself into Az, and the two of them flew into another rack. I fell to my knees, sucking in air and letting the world come back into focus. It sounded like Jack got one or two good swipes in with his vicious-looking claws before he flew backwards again, crashing through one of the doors at the back of the store. What lay beyond remained unknown, as the door immediately reformed behind him, pulling back in its shattered wood until no trace of damage remained. Az's head came bobbing into sight over the racks. I got back to my feet. This whole lack of fear thing was really starting to grow on me. You can force choke me all you want, Vader, I snarled at him. We both know you're just a whiny little sand-hating bitch. Az's face was filled with fury as he raised his hand to smite me again. Suddenly Butch stepped between us, the Chekhov gun leveled squarely at Az's head. Az's look turned to one of contempt, but his hand still lowered slightly. How many of those bullets are you down to, Butch? He asked. 2? 3? Are you really sure you want to waste one on little old me? What then? Will you use on the one he sends after me, or the one after that? Eventually the big man himself will want to come. Better hope you still have at least one left for him. My eyes fell on another gun that had fallen onto the floor in the struggle, one that I had noticed on my first walk through of the aisles. A stupid idea popped into my head. I reached down and grabbed it, cocking it loudly as I leveled it towards Az. Step aside, Butch, I growled. Butch shot a look back at me, saw what I held, and gave me a tight grin as he lowered the Chekhov gun and stepped out of my way. I squeezed the trigger on the Super Soaker XP100 and sent a stream of water directly into Az's face. His scream was piercing as the smoke immediately started pouring off his melting face. I stepped towards him, continuously pumping more water as I adjusted my stream to any piece of exposed skin, his squirming left exposed. The power of Christ compels you, bitch, I yelled as I stood over him, furiously pumping the squirt gun. Don't fuck with retail workers. Flesh fell from the demon's bones like really good barbecue ribs, bubbling into vapor from the floor. His screams became so high-pitched that I heard a few of the more delicate glass items in the shop shatter. I didn't let up on the stream of water until the plastic toy lost pressure and dribbled to a stop. Az collapsed, his clothes falling into a pile on the floor as his body steamed away. I stood panting, feeling the adrenaline burning off my skin. My shoulder, forgotten during the fight, began to throb painfully, and the squirt gun slipped from my grasp. "Did you seriously just use a Pulp Fiction line on me?" I looked up at Butch in surprise and started to laugh. I mean, how often am I really going to have an opportunity like that? I just couldn't resist. He chuckled along with me. "How'd you know that super soaker would work?" "You made it pretty easy to figure out what he was with all that boss's rebellion talk. And I thought with the kind of shit you have in here, there was a pretty decent chance that thing was filled with holy water. Anyway, if it wasn't, I knew you'd probably just look at me like I was an idiot and shoot him with the Chekhov gun instead. So you know, what the hell?" He chuckled again and walked over to me to examine my shoulder. "How's it look?" I asked through gritted teeth. "I mean, you're going to need stitches probably, but I don't think you're going to bleed out anytime soon." I nodded, then glanced over at the back of the shop towards the door Jack had disappeared through. "Is he going to be all right?" I asked. "Jack?" he replied. "Yeah, he'll be fine. He's a pretty solid guy, has friends everywhere. I'm sure someone over there will put him up until he finds his way back." Holy shit, his name really is Jack. I thought I was just being clever. Nobody knows his real name, actually. He doesn't talk much, but most people end up landing on that joke eventually, so it's kind of just stuck. "Ow, my self-esteem," I deadpanned. "What's over there?" "Over where?" "You said someone over there will put him up. What's over there?" "Oh, that door leads to the back rooms. It opens up somewhere different every time, so you usually have to find her another way back if you go through it." I nodded, not really understanding, but increasingly distracted by the radiating pain in my shoulder. "Well, let me know next time you see him. I think I owe that guy a beer. Next question. Where is the nearest hospital?" He grinned. "Come on, I'll patch you up. Gotten pretty good at it over the years, working this job. Only lost a couple dozen patients." I nodded and followed as he led to another door behind the cash register. He stopped with his hand on the knob. "Oh, and remember how I was trying to figure out why you ended up finding this place? I think I figured it out. Want a job?" I looked at him. I thought about the banshee, and the monkey's paw, and the werewolf, and the demon. Then I thought about the long series of dead-end, boring jobs I'd had up until this point. "Do you have a dental plan?" My third week working at Hal's found me shoveling harpy shit. The filthy birds used their horrifically scarred, twisted, and just generally unattractive human heads to hurl insults at me as the sweat dripped down my face. Cleaning this particular cage was always rough, as the dirty hybrids took a great deal of joy in trying to add to the mess faster than I could clean it. My poop cart was half full of a variety of dung, having already cleaned out the unicorn, chupacabra, thunderbird, and yeti cages. I'm not sure exactly what bizarre combination of chemistry and magic was happening, but somehow the scent emanating from the cart reminded me of quality chicken parmesan. "Hey, cocksucker, liking that smell? Want a taste from the sauce?" screeched Blanche from high above me. The four disgusting creatures laughed raucously and started lobbing down additional work for me to enjoy. Rose fluttered down to stare at me. "If you're going to be doing butt stuff with us, you're gonna need some lube." And she spat directly at my face. I swung up my pitchfork to block, the spittle immediately sizzling through one of the tines and dripping to the straw-covered floor. "Rose," I said sternly, "if you ruin my equipment, I'm just going to head back to the thrift shop and you can spend the next week swimming in compost." Rose snorted at me and flapped her way back up the perches where her sisters sat chortling. I slipped back on my headphones to drown out the screeching vitriol and continued with my chores. Internally, I reminded myself that I was still in my training period, which, much like many of my previous jobs, mostly consisted of doing all the work that Butch didn't want to do. Still, though, I thought as I used the remaining part of the pitchfork to lift another load of rancid harpy shit, this was better than working at Denny's. Despite the intrinsically unpleasant nature of the cleanup, I genuinely enjoyed spending time in the menagerie. 10-year-old me had been utterly obsessed with cryptids, so getting the opportunity to crawl into a large pen and cuddle with a couple dozen jackalopes was kind of a dream come true, not to mention the weekly poker games with the centaurs. I had doubled my first paycheck when I realized they were incapable of understanding the concept of bluffing. Half an hour later, and I could finally walk across the harpy cage and actually feel the firmness of the floor beneath my feet. Exhaling explosively, I pulled the wheelbarrow out of the cage, locked the door behind me, and leaned tiredly against the bars. I allowed my eyes to wander around the store as I tried to will my muscles into relaxation. Much like the thrift shop, the menagerie seemed to have been organized by an utter madman. Large beasts were housed next to tiny, predators next to prey, those capable of speech across from those who mostly just roared or screeched. The only exception was the largest animals, dragons, mammoths, the bipolar cyclops, etc., who were all held by the far west wall where the ceiling was highest. A soft bell rang as a customer entered. I stabbed the pitchfork into the pile of waste, pulled off my headphones, and began walking towards the front to make myself available. Behind me, Dorothy made a comment on my backside that would have been flattering from anyone else and sent another bomb through the bars to splatter at my feet. I was fully prepared to launch into a formal retail greeting, but my words caught in my throat as I saw who had entered. Dark hair, full lips, green-grey eyes that pierced through every defense I possessed. A low-cut blouse that presented a couple very convincing reasons to break eye contact. This woman's beauty was otherworldly. Actually, considering the nature of most of my clientele, otherworldly was probably more literal than literary. She smiled at me and I forgot my standard greeting, my name and how to breathe. "Hey there, new guy," she purred softly. "King illegal forester pig wild killin' it, is," I responded wittily. She blinked. "Well, that one's new. Excuse me for a moment." I turned and walked over to the barrel full of coconut rum I had prepared to feed the rougarou and dunked my head in, taking in a few large mouthfuls. I re-emerged, dripping, cold, and a little queasy from the taste. "Let me try that again," I said. Nothing like a full immersion in alcohol to help talk to a woman way out of your league. "Hi, welcome to Hal's low-cost menagerie. My name's Clear. How can I help you?" The woman smiled broadly. "I must say, you handled that better than a lot of men." "A lot of things get easier once a guy embraces his own idiocy. What brings you in today? Ingredients, food, or companionship?" "I actually just needed to have a word with Butch. Is he around?" "Butch should be covering the counter in the thrift shop. If you wanted to look around for a bit, I can run and grab him for you." "Maybe in a minute. It's been a long time since I've been in this part of the shop." She stepped forward and looped her arm with mine. "And since this is the section I walked into, I think the shop wants us to get acquainted." Goosebumps raised instantly on the part of her arm that touched mine, which immediately brought up a twinge of nervous suspicion. Butch had insisted that I reverse my monkey paw wish, quite understandably of the opinion that fear was absolutely necessary to keep oneself from doing something idiotically reckless in an environment like Hal's. We worked on the wording of the wish for a ridiculously long time to restore my fear, allow me to function while afraid without crapping my pants, and to avoid any comically ironic twists. It seemed to work out pretty well, although I had noticed that the more scared I became, the more I would impulsively make sardonic comments. Butch didn't seem to notice that part, since it fit my personality like a glove. I led the distractingly beautiful woman through the dank maze of cages, allowing her to direct the duration spent admiring each of the animals. She had obviously been around the mythical block a few times, since she barely seemed impressed by some of the more commonplace residents like the chimeras and the Jersey Devils. She hurried past the harpy cages as the four of them immediately began to harmonize in a repetitive chant of "whore," but she did fall instantly in love with the three-headed quokkas. Brushing off my warnings, I had seen a few of the more mature ones let out small belches of fire. She released my arm and climbed directly into the pen with them, laying down and allowing them to curiously climb over her while she laughed delightedly. "Oh, I love these," she exclaimed. "What are they?" "They were just discovered a couple weeks ago. We decided to call them Chalamets." "Chalamets?" "Yeah, because they're cute, but also kind of off-putting." She laughed again as one of them began to shimmy its body down the front of her blouse. I sternly told myself that it was ridiculous to be jealous of a rodent. The woman rose gracefully back to her feet. The Chalamet still nestled comfortably between her breasts. Two of its heads were sticking out of the top of her shirt, looking around gleefully. The third seemed to have fallen asleep against the swell of her cleavage. Lucky jerk. "I guess I've been chosen," she declared, climbing carefully out of the pen. "This little guy's coming home with me." "The pets pick the owners," I agreed. "We can get you checked out in the thrift shop if you still needed to talk to Butch, Ms. Babs." I was incredibly confused for a moment, because the voice that spoke her name was not the dulcet music she had used before, but rather masculine and gruff and gravelly. Also, it seemed to be coming from behind me. Butch was standing next to the Kelpie stalls. His customary scowl had descended into a disgusted grimace. Babs gave him a smile that would have lit up a cemetery, but Butch didn't soften so much as a werewolf's hair. "I thought we agreed that it would be best if you stayed away from the shop," Butch said, his voice dangerous. "I thought that was more of a suggestion," Babs entreated. "I didn't think you had actually trespassed me. That suggestion was based off the assumption that you didn't want to see me any more than I wanted to see you." "Butch, come on, don't be like that. It's been, 50 years since the last time we saw each other? Think for a minute. Would I stay away that long only to show up now if it wasn't important? Why do you have a Chalamet between your tits?" Babs crossed her hands across her chest protectively. "Even someone like me needs an emotional support animal, Butch. Get a harpy then, you'd have more in common." "I knew it was you who got them to call me that." I started laughing uncontrollably. Butch and Babs paused their fighting to stare at me. "Butch, you absolute rascal," I chortled. "You never told me you used to be married." It's not often that you get to witness an actual miracle, so I made sure to relish every second that I was able to see Butch blush. Babs suddenly became very occupied, scratching a basilisk behind its ear. My shit-eating grin stayed on my face as I forced a big hug on Butch. "Man, she is way too hot for you. What, are you actually rich or something? Is this the part where I ask for a raise? Or hang on, was it a physical thing?" "Wait here, I'm gonna go get a ruler." Butch pulled away angrily. "Clear, is there any way I can convince you to just not be yourself right now?" "Not a chance, DeMarco. You know I have a terminal case of not knowing when to shut up. So..." I sat down on the wheelbarrow full of dung and leaned back comfortably, my stomach growling at the smell. "How did you two meet? Also, Babs, does that mean you're single now?" The look Butch gave me was disgusted. I returned it with an impish grin. "You really have no concept of appropriate, do you, Clear? We work in a second-hand shop. This is kind of what we do." Butch sighed and Babs tried unsuccessfully to suppress a smile. "I think I like this one, Butch," she told him. "Yeah, you would. Maybe you should just tell me why you're here," Butch said to her. "I'm not sure if I have the energy to play around today." "Well, that sounds familiar." "Babs, come on." Babs' grin flickered and fell. "Butch, Hal's been hiding out at my place for the last few months. He went missing yesterday." Butch's face didn't change, but he did fall silent. Babs seemed to be silently pleading with him to hear her out, and he was obviously considering it. Finally, he glanced over at me. "Clear, I think we need a couple minutes. The BEK's just got in with a new shipment. Will you go sign them in and restock, please?" There were times to joke, and there were times to just leave people to their conversation. I had a hard time telling the difference sometimes, or most of the time, but I had learned that when Butch asked politely, it was probably for the best to just follow his lead. I nodded silently and made my way to the elevator at the back of the menagerie. In the elevator, I took a moment to consider the whole conversation I had just witnessed. Hal had been staying with Butch's ex-wife? That actually made a lot of sense. I knew Hal and Butch had been pretty famously tight, so the last place anyone would have expected Hal to go would be Butch's ex-wife. And what did that mean for Babs? Butch was one of the most formidable people I knew, but even he had spoken of Hal with a bit of awe. If Hal went to Babs for protection, God only knows what she must be capable of. Honestly, it probably meant she was exactly my type, i.e., a really bad idea. No, I wasn't really going to try to hook up with her, tempting though it may be. But she did strike me as someone who would play along with my attempts to get a rise out of Butch. I shook myself out of my thoughts and pressed the TC button on the panel. I felt the slowly becoming familiar lurch in my stomach. My hand instinctively reached out to brace myself against the wall as the tiny room began racing off to the left. That surprised the hell out of me the first time I'd ridden this thing. I had tried to figure out how any of it was possible at first, but pretty quickly decided I liked not having a migraine more. The elevator entered its cruising speed, so I placed my hand on the other wall to prepare for the equally jarring deceleration. While I waited, my eyes scanned down the button panel again. There were 6 of them. Well, 9 if you count the door open, door close, we're all gonna die buttons. Besides the TC where I was going and the M from where I'd just been, there were also buttons for FD, our fine dining restaurant, LH, our love hotel, and one actually managed to fit in BOSEC, the Blood Orgy Suite and Event Center. The final button was at the bottom, and it just said D. Butch hadn't told me what that one went to, just to never go down there unless Satan himself was on my tail. I had decided that it was prudent to take him at his word on that one. I felt my weight shift towards my bracing hand. I tried not to think about how far I had travelled in the last 3 minutes. I hadn't stepped outside from the menagerie exit yet, but I knew the restaurant opened just outside Brussels, and that trip only took about 1:30. The elevator ground to a halt, and the doors opened to the thrift store. No customers, fortunately. Butch had assured me that stealing from the place was impossible, but even in the supernatural realms, customers became pissy when they had to wait. The BEKs were not customers, though, so they just had to put up with waiting. 4 of them stood next to the front counter, 3 boys and 1 girl. A pallet with several layers of boxes was floating about 6 inches off the ground next to them. As usual, their faces were identical and expressionless. Their blonde hair was cut in the same early Beatles bowl cut. Their eyes were the same deep black voids. "About time, asshole," the tallest of them grumbled. It always amused me that despite their appearance, they always sounded like middle-aged teamsters. "Deepest apologies, my tallest," I intoned mournfully while dipping into a florid bow. Standing back up, I slipped back into my normal speech. Seriously though, I'm really not. I was watching Butch meet up with the ex he hasn't seen in 50 years. Believe me, totally worth it. The tallest snorted. "Babs is back, huh? That poor guy. She's had centuries of experience manipulating men like him." "Hey, I'm still new here. This was the first I'd heard of her. You guys want to fill me in on some backstory?" The girl shook her head. "Not our business, kid. We deal in inventory, not gossip. Union rules." "Nothing wrong with a little idle conversation, Munchkin." "Call me that again and you'll lose a finger." "I believe you. Short stuff. Come on, I just want to know how large the pile of shit I'm standing in is." Another of the boys blew out a breath. "Look, we really don't pay much attention. She was here a lot, and then she wasn't. I know she worked for meth, so she spent most of her time down in the restaurant." I blinked in surprise. Didn't see that coming. Whatever, I'm pretty sure most of us have a past we're not so proud of, and working in the restaurant would make sense if she was on meth. The tallest spoke again. "Quit thinking like an idiot, Clear. METH, Monsters for the Ethical Treatment of Humans. Babs used to make sure the people they served down in the restaurant were treated humanely and that they didn't suffer unnecessarily during the slaughtering process." "Oh, nice. She struck me as the humanitarian sort. Any idea why they split?" "Butch's old assistant kept on jokingly flirting with her, so Butch killed him." "Oh fuck, really?" "No, not really. Now will you please sign the damn paperwork so we can get back to work?" I grabbed the outstretched clipboard, signed my name at the bottom, and handed it back. The tallest tore off the receipt copy and handed it back to me. The 4 of them walked in lockstep out of the door as I turned to begin the unloading process. Curious as I was about what Butch and Babs were talking about, I had to admit that this was my favorite part of the job. The paperwork identified this as estate sale procurements, which meant a 50-50 chance of it being junk or awesome. The BEKs were good at picking out items of significance, but a well-loved children's toy or a serial killer's trophy collection had a tendency to set off that same bell in their heads. I was met with disappointment for the first 8 boxes. Well, mostly. I did find myself spending an inordinate amount of time studying a fascinating painting of what appeared to be a Soviet-era army marching across an ocean with the silhouette of the Golden Gate Bridge barely visible in the background. A pod of fish painted with the Soviet flag swam about the advancing army's feet. I decided to hang it behind the cash register so I could study it more in depth later. There was definitely something to it since it took every ounce of concentration to pull my eyes off of it. I struck gold on the 9th box, where I found a translated copy of the Voynich manuscript, an unabridged version of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, 12 missing books of Homer, one of which was titled "That Time Achilles and Odysseus Totally Boned," a strange red hat that smelled like sulfur-flavored ambergris and looked like it was perpetually coated with sand, and a small bow complete with arrow-filled quiver that all appeared to be plated in gold. Pulling out one of the arrows, I noticed that they seemed to be quite intentionally phallic. I quickly double-checked everything in the box off the inventory list the BEKs gave me and set it aside for Butch set prices. I found a few other decent items scattered through the rest of the boxes, but I handled them myself due to us having very similar items already in stock. Mass-produced grimoires, a few tarot decks, a couple haunted toys, a number of enchanted pieces of clothing, things like that. At the bottom of the final box, since that's how these things always go for some reason, I found trouble. The moment I picked up the forest green book with High Clear written in Comic Sans on the front cover, I knew there was no way anything good could come of it. But of course I immediately said, "Hi book, nice to meet you," and opened it. The first line of the first page simply read, "Ha, you fucking idiot," and it began to glow red hot in my hands. I dropped it, since I had completely ignored the MOSHA requirements of protective equipment when handling untested magical artifacts. On the floor, the book flipped its pages towards the center and began to emit a bubble of green light. "Oh, God damn it!" I yelled, and quickly ran behind the register to grab the canister of pure salt we kept under the counter for situations like this. I managed to get a circle drawn around the book just before the bubble burst, and a giant, hideous, praying mantis-looking thing flew directly at me. It hit the barrier with a dull thud, looked down at the circle of salt, and hissed audibly. I let out an audible breath as my heart pounded away in my chest. It twisted its arms and waved them in front of its face, immediately transforming into a woman with short red hair and piercing eyes. The wings stayed in place, though, flapping softly to keep her aloft and looking down in contempt at me. "Release me," she whispered fiercely at me. I stared back at her, wanting to think she was cute, but unable to get her insect form far enough out of my head to consider it. I know there is much we can learn from each other if we can negotiate a truce. We can find a way to coexist. Can there be a peace between us? "Peace, no peace, release me now!" "Man, Butch said you guys didn't have a sense of humor, but you just rolled with that one straight away." "Rolled with what, human? I said release me this instant." "Wait, you mean those scriptwriters actually came up with realistic dialogue for that scene? Huh, who would have thunk it?" She threw up her hands. "Why must I always be caught by humans who make no sense?" "I think that might say more about you than me, sweetie." The yellow door at the far end of the shop burst open, and a tall, lanky fellow covered in red-brown fur casually strolled in. "Jack!" I yelled enthusiastically. So far as I knew, nobody had laid eyes on him since he disappeared through that door on my first day. Jack sauntered over to me and gave me a fist bump before clapping me on the shoulder with camaraderie. He glanced up at the fairy briefly, who bared a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth at him. He flipped her off in return. "Where you been? Butch told me you'd be okay, but I was started to get a little worried." Jack reached into a pocket of fur and withdrew a small business card to hand over. In a small typeset, it simply said, "The Backrooms." I flipped it over to see a small description of the itsy-bitsy teeny-weeny multiversal in-betweeny. "Yep, that definitely clears it all up." He grinned at me. "Well, let me buy you a drink down in the restaurant before you head out tonight. I definitely owe you one." He nodded at me. Then he shot a questioning glance up at the fairy trapped in her circle of salt. "I have no idea. Butch told me how to trap her, but not what to do with her after. Any thoughts?" Jack shrugged and fired a finger gun at her. "That's a thought. It's iron rounds for fairies, right?" Since I had absolutely no idea where Butch kept the iron bullets, it was probably for the best that he chose that moment to come through the elevator door. "What's all this, then?" he asked, taking in the scene with a bewildered look. "Jack!" yelled Babs from behind Butch with delight. She ran towards him and launched herself into his surprised embrace, burying her face into his fur. The Chalamet squeezed out from between them and scrambled up to the top of Jack's head, chittering in annoyance. Ever so slowly, I watched as Jack and Babs began to lose balance and tip backwards. It probably would have resulted in everyone sharing a good-natured laugh at their expense if they didn't fall directly onto the salt line. The fairy wasted no time flipping straight back into her praying mantis form and flying straight at me. I managed to duck underneath of her just before impact, but her back talons managed to swipe against my raised forearm, drawing a thin line of blood. She quickly made for the front door, but a quick shout of, "Hey Siri, set Fey protection wards!" from Butch blocked her exit with a cross of bright purple lines. She spun on us furiously, her face darting around the shop for another way out. Babs and Jack were pulling themselves back to their feet, but Butch was already in action, running through an aisle with his hands deftly swiping items off the shelves. "Clear, get the salt ready," Butch shouted at me. Sensing that he was probably the largest threat in the room, the fairy went for Butch next. He slid to a stop at the end of the aisle and stood his ground. When she got close enough to him for Babs to let out a yell of concern, Butch reached into his pocket and threw a cloud of powder into her face. They must have been iron fillings or something, because she immediately shrieked and started trying to claw it out of her eyes. Butch moved in closer, an iron bar in his hand ready to finish her off, but one of her flailing wings caught him in the head and sent him sprawling. She shook her insectile face, and her reddened eyes fell on me standing in front of the cash register holding the bag of salt. Jack and Babs came at her from either side, but a powerful flap of her wings sent them flying. I stared dumbly at her as she began to race straight at me, her face filled with rage. I looked around helplessly for anything within reach that might help me in this fight. The Chekhov gun was too far away. Nothing nearby was made with iron. Really, the only thing within reach that might work was... I grabbed the painting of the Soviet army walking on water and held it up between me and the charging Faye. The impact never came. I lowered the painting just enough for me to look over the top and saw her examining the painting while tapping her chin thoughtfully with her long, thin tarsi. "Interesting," she said. "Is this intended as a Cold War propaganda piece? If so, which side is it for? A warning for the West or an aspiration for the East?" "I'm not sure," I replied, calmly walking around the counter and pretending to contemplate the painting while surreptitiously beginning to reform the salt circle around her. I thought at first that it was just a depiction of some kind of Orwellian future, but now I'm starting to wonder if it's something way more insidious. "This might actually be an original Alexander Samokhvalov," she said, fascinated. "I don't actually know. We just got it in. I haven't had a chance to get it officially appraised yet. If you're interested, though, we might be able to make a deal." I stepped back and sprinkled the last bit of salt in the bag onto the completed circle. With a quick motion, I reached over and pulled the painting away, breaking her line of sight. Dismay filled her eyes as she looked down to realize she was trapped again. "Fuck me," she groaned. "Sorry," I said. "Really not interested when you're still in that skin. If you want to switch back to the redhead, though, we could talk about it." The fairy shot me a dirty look, but shifted back to her human form anyway. "If that is the cost of my freedom, I'll do what I must do." "Oh, no, I was kidding. Sorry, I have a lot of perversions, but formicophilia is not on the list." "How do you know what it is called, then?" "I really don't have a good answer to that. I Google random things when I'm bored." "Then name your desire, human, and allow me to return to my realm." Butch, Babs, and Jack had joined me around the circle at this point, and the two former lovers were exchanging a pointed look. "Weirdly enough, kid, your fuck-up might have some unexpected benefits here. Babs and I were just coming to talk to you about it, actually. We need to track down Hal. This shop is in some serious trouble if the Hellspawn managed to get a hold of him. He was safe over with Babs, but now that he's vanished again, we really need to do something about this." He looked over at the trapped fairy. "How about that? Can you bring Hal to us?" "You did not trap me, shopkeeper. My deal is not with you." Butch looked at me. "All you, kid? Think you're ready to go solo?" I smiled at him. I was born ready. It was pretty satisfying that I even got Jack to let out an exasperated groan with that one. "All right, babe. What do you think? Can you bring Hal back to us?" The fairy's eyes went distant. "No. He has been shielded against interference by fairy magic. I don't know how, but I cannot touch him." "Well, shit. How about information? Can you tell us anything about him?" She nodded. 3 questions, 3 true answers, and you will give me my freedom." "Fine, but no bullshit answers, okay? No technically true, but only because homonyms exist. Answers, and nothing so cryptic that it only makes sense after we're done. You got me? Also, once you give us the answers and I break the circle, you can't hurt any of us for trapping you." "Agreed. I will speak only the full truth, and we shall all depart unharmed." "All right. Where is Hal? What is the quickest way for us to get to him? And what will we need to do in order to successfully find him and bring him back?" She closed her eyes briefly as if scanning her hard drive. "He is currently hiding in purgatory. The blue door at the back of the shop will bring you to the realm, but then you take the subway to Terrace 5 and catch the bus to the historical district. Once there, you must have with you a servant of heaven, a denizen of hell, and a man perpetually trapped in the mortal realm. Between the 4 of you, you will be able to track down a social media influencer who goes by the name of Razamataz, who will guide you to Hal. I cannot tell whether you will succeed in convincing him to return. The uncertainty that surrounds him is too deep to see clearly, but all other paths lead to certain failure. Bear in mind, these instructions are intended for you alone. If these others decide to leave you behind, these answers may no longer be truthful." "All right, that'll have to do. Thank you, gorgeous." and I broke the salt circle with my foot. The fairy immediately vanished with a crack of lightning. The four of us looked at each other for a moment. "That was uncharacteristically straightforward for you, Clear," Butch said, sounding slightly impressed. That whole screwing up the 3 questions trope has been done to death. I didn't think there was anything more I could add to it, so what's the point? "Well, strangely enough, we have most of our group already here," Babs commented. "All we need is a servant of heaven." "Wait, really?" I said, surprised. "Is Jack from hell?" "No, I am," Babs replied. "My place is located in one of hell's suburbs." "And the man trapped in the mortal realm?" Butch held to his hand. "Right here. I will be answering no follow-up questions." He looked over at Jack. "Hey, buddy. Glad you made it back okay. Any chance you'd be willing to keep an eye on the shop for a few days while we go drag the owner back?" Jack raised his hand and rubbed his thumb and forefinger together. "Of course. I'll give you double what I'm paying Clear." "Wait, what the fuck?" I yelped. "Shut up, Clear. You're still in training. Is that cool, Jack?" Jack gave him a thumbs up. "Great. So all we need to do now is track down a servant of heaven and we can get started." Right on cue, the front door opened and a fat, middle-aged guy walked in, naked except for a drooping sash. He had a toothpick sticking out from his teeth and a tiny pair of soft white wings sticking out from his shoulder blades. "Hey dudes," he said with a lecherous smile on his face. "I just talked to a bunch of creepy kids who said you all might have my bow." A wide grin spread across my face. "I think we might have what you're looking for, but technically speaking, it's our bow now." His face began to turn angry, but I held up a calming hand. "Let's not get off on the wrong foot here. I'm sure we can make a deal. I'm Clear. By the way, it's good to meet you." He accepted my outstretched hand. "You too, I suppose. I'm X-Mac." My grin grew 3 sizes that day. "Of course you are. Hey, anyone else hungry? I'm fucking starving. Let's hit the restaurant before we get started."